Right, we're ready. Chris, come on. We now come to the Opposition Day motion on rural communities. I inform the House that Mr Speaker has selected the amendment tabled in the name of the Prime Minister. I call the Opposition spokesperson to move the motion. Shadow Secretary of State, Victoria Atkins.
Yeah. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Rural people feel betrayed by this Labour government of the urban elite. Before the election, the Prime Minister promised that a Labour Party under his leadership would form a new relationship with the countryside based on respect. Yet after a year and a half, his government has shown nothing but contempt, arrogance and, on occasion, cruelty to rural people. And I note it is a great pity the Secretary of State is missing on action on this debate, but then she doesn't seem to like scrutiny. His government's decisions have resulted in a cost of living crisis with rising food prices, rising unemployment and the highest taxes on record, whilst business investment and confidence have plummeted and growth has flatlined. The consequences can be seen and felt in the very fabric of our rural communities. Shops, pubs, hairdressers and post offices in market towns are closing because employers cannot afford Labour's hikes to national insurance, the minimum wage and to business rates. Agricultural suppliers are disappearing as farming investment plummets, and a record number of farms have closed in the last 12 months, with more to follow because Labour's chaotic farming decisions and failure to launch their new SFI scheme have undermined their livelihoods at every turn. These aren't just buildings or land. These businesses used to employ people, giving young people their first job, bringing mothers back into the workforce after maternity leave, enabling people to have good careers near their families, encouraging others to start their own businesses, and bringing prosperity and vibrancy to our market towns and villages. But as a direct result of Labour's taxes and business cost rises, these jobs are going. As a successful small business owner in one of my market towns said to me before Christmas, Reeves has cost me an extra £12,000 this year, which I simply don't have. My business will not survive this government.
Will my right honourable friend allow me?
I will.
My right honourable friend, quite rightly, talking about what really matters in the countryside, namely the family farm tax. Does it say much about the priorities of this government that they think it's really important to waste Parliament's time in banning people from getting on a horse and chasing after a rag soaked in linseed oil?
My right honourable friend and county neighbour, of course, understands all of the challenges facing our rural communities. And I think we all wonder why it is that in the midst of this cost of living crisis, with the very worrying events happening overseas, as food prices for all of our constituents continue to rise, as jobs are being lost in all of our constituencies because of the policies of this government, nonetheless this government appears to be prioritising a lawful hobby. But I'm going to come on to that in a minute, because in the midst of all this socialist misery, Labour is killing off pubs with their business rate hikes of up to 78%. They may laugh, but they're not getting a drink out of it, are they? 2 pubs and restaurants are closing every single day under this government. So support our pubs and pop into your local for a drink. The good news is that you won't meet a Labour MP in there, as they're all being barred. Now, in contrast, we Conservatives, they don't like it up them. In contrast, these Conservatives have fully costed plans to scrap business rates entirely for 250,000 high street businesses and pubs, paid for by welfare reforms that the Prime Minister is too weak to push through. We Conservatives care, we get it, and we have their backs. I'll give way.
Grateful to my right honourable friend giving way. And doesn't that speak to a wider point, Madam Deputy Speaker? I'm sure my right honourable friend agrees that the shocking statistics out this week of just how few young people are able to get Saturday jobs shows that by cutting business rates, allowing them to employ people, actually stands a much better chance of keeping them off welfare in the first place.
Exactly right. And the difference is on this side of the House we are used to running businesses and working in the private sector, whereas on that side of the House they have no idea and no clue. But it isn't just our market towns and villages that are hurt by this government. Our public services are too. Labour has scrapped the Rural Services Delivery Grant. They've imposed a local government finance settlement which delivers a 3-year punishment beating to shire districts while their urban counterparts do better. And they have made cynical changes to funding formulas so that rural areas lose out. These choices will have a real impact on the delivery of public services from health and social care to schools, vital infrastructure and transport. Scrapping the £2 bus fare has increased the cost of living for rural residents, and that's before the increased fuel duty will take even more money from our pockets later this year. I'm going to make some progress because I know how popular this debate is. Labour's choices will scar our landscapes and nature forever. They are reversing our bold commitments to nature with another U-turn on biodiversity net gains. The CEO of the London Wildlife Trust has said that this U-turn is a farce, a disgrace, it's desperate. Well, that's Labour Party policy for you. And this U-turn has a particular poignancy because of the industrialisation of our countryside with pylons, substations, solar estates and wind turbines against local opinion, and all to meet the unachievable net zero target set by the Secretary of State for Energy. My constituents are the victims of this in Lincolnshire, where Labour's plans will destroy people's homes, our cherished landscape and nature, as well as prime agricultural land that feeds the nation. We will fight these plans very quickly, and then I must make progress.
Well, I want to make a salient point because, of course, when these impositions are faced by local people, it's prime land that's taken out of production, compromising our food security, making us less economically resilient, and costing jobs and livelihoods in the countryside.
I agree with my right honourable friend and county neighbour more. But what Labour does not seem to understand is that rural areas are not against building more homes and infrastructure. They just want them in the right places and for them to work with the grain of the community, not against it. But at least the Prime Minister is being consistent in this one instance, because in the election campaign he said that he was happy to make enemies of the people who oppose his plans. Well, that's a rare example of an election promise he has kept. And just as these ministers don't understand business because none of them have ever run one, nor do they understand the quintessential quality of rural life, that sense of belonging, that sense of being part of a community, from the parish church to the local riding stables to our local pubs, it is about people coming together. And as has been mentioned, rural sports is an example of this. They are a key part of the rural way of life for participants and non-participants alike. They're responsible for 26,000 full-time equivalent jobs and perform vital conservation work across the countryside. Wander down a rural high street and you will see shops selling clothing and equipment for rural sports, as well as farriers, gun makers, saddlers and others dotted around the countryside. A careless policy on rural sports will have wide-reaching impacts across our rural communities. Now, we rightly have some of the strongest gun laws in the world. The intent to strengthen these safeguards further is understandable. But we urge the government to pause and work with the shooting community on their serious concerns that the current proposals will have grave and unintended consequences, including causing further delays in vital medical assessments for licence holders. I'll give way one more.
I'm grateful to the Shadow Secretaries giving way. Is she aware of the great concern in Shropshire amongst the rural community, in particular farmers, that the government is conflating lethal firearms with shotguns? And of course, shotguns should be controlled, but they are already strictly controlled, and they are a vital part of rural life, and especially for farmers controlling vermin or other rural pursuits. So I appeal through the Shadow Secretary of State to the Minister to look again at this and to disregard this consultation that hasn't been called for and is unnecessary.
As I say, we urge the government to pause and work with the shooting community because, as I say, we all understand the intent behind these proposals, but they have got to get this right because of the ramifications, quite grave ramifications that could result. And on the subject of trail hunting, we'll hear about this afternoon. It is a long-established and specifically permitted by the last Labour government in the Hunting Act as a humane alternative to fox hunting. It is rightly a criminal offence to break the terms of the Hunting Act, and any such criminal offences should be enforced rigorously. Indeed, there have been 416 convictions in the last 15 years. Labour MPs need to be able to justify why a blanket ban should be imposed instead of tackling those who actually break the law. If they are to have intellectual consistency, do they advocate the banning of driving on the basis that some people speed? Of course not. It should be about the effective enforcement of the criminal law their predecessor as a Labour government brought in. I wish, for example, that the government would prioritise stopping the egregious crime of hare coursing, something we suffer from very badly in Lincolnshire, or organised rural crime, or fly tipping, all terrible crimes that seem to be increasing. But under this government, sadly, police numbers are falling, including in rural areas. Rather than tackle the issue of policing and enforcement, the government wants to impose a blanket ban. I will in a moment. And they are doing this. Let's be clear-eyed as to why they're doing this. They are doing this because the Prime Minister is weak, his cabinet is circling, and his backbenchers are revolting. The government needs to throw... The government needs to throw some red meat to them, and so they are coming after lawful rural sports. I'll give way to the gentleman.
I very much thank the Shadow Secretary of State for giving way from her humorous speech. She's just listed a series of changes that she would like this Labour government to make. Can she tell the House what a 15th year of Conservative government have made those changes?
Very much so. And indeed, if he comes to the county of Lincolnshire, he would see the superb operation that Lincolnshire Police did with the support of Home Office ministers throughout that time in order to tackle hare coursing. But we have to be clear-eyed about the impact of organised rural crime, because high-value theft of farm machinery is having a terrible impact across farms. In short, this government cannot let people live and let live. Another example, and the final example I'm going to give, is this the government's arrogance and contempt, of course, over the infamous family farm and family tax business tax fiasco. What a complete and utter mess by the Secretary of State, the Chancellor and the Prime Minister. I have some advice for the next Labour Prime Minister later this year. This is a textbook example of how not to govern. They betrayed an election promise not to touch APR and BPR at the first opportunity. They spent 14 months marching junior ministers and backbenchers up the hill to defend it, telling the rural community that they were wrong and that ministers knew better. They recommitted to this tax at the budget on the 26th of November and at DEFRA orals on the 18th of December. And then they had a mystical revelation 5 days later, and they U-turned on their hated tax. It was a Christmas miracle, an absolute miracle that any minister could look themselves in the mirror after this chaotic and shameful episode. And their mess of a partial U-turn will only raise enough money to pay for an afternoon in the NHS, yet as the CLA points out, it will condemn those families operating on the slimmest of margins that have invested in expensive machinery or who live in expensive parts of the country to selling the family farm to pay this vindictive tax. This is why this tax must be axed. We Conservatives have forced 4 votes on this issue in the last 14 months. Labour MPs toed the party line until the budget vote in December, and that made the difference. They have the chance tonight to axe the family farm and family business tax completely. Their constituents will be watching. And this year, we Conservatives will continue to fight for rural communities, for the shops, the pubs and small businesses which are the backbone of the rural economy, for better public services and better funding on our vital public services, and for rural people and sports to have the freedom to live and let live, and, of course, for our farmers to thrive, not just survive. Because we Conservatives care about our market towns, our villages, our neighbours and our families. We get it and we have your backs.
The question is as on the order paper. I call the Minister to move the amendment. Minister Dame Angela.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I beg to move the amendment standing in the name of the Prime Minister, and I welcome the chance to open the debate on behalf of the Government and highlight what we are doing to support rural people, businesses and communities to realise their full potential. I'd like to also apologise to you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and the House in advance that I won't be able to stay for the whole debate. I'm sure you'll miss me. We are committed to improving the quality of life for all people across the country. And to achieve this, we're putting the needs of people and businesses in rural areas at the heart of policy making. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm quite frankly baffled that the opposition thinks it has any right to speak on behalf of rural communities after the 14 years of chaos and corruption that they put this country through. I am astounded that they're now trying to present themselves as the solution to the problems that rural communities face, when they were in fact the architects of many of those very same problems. The very members sat opposite me presided over the first Parliament in modern history where living standards were lower at the end than they were at the beginning, and rural communities were some of the hardest hit by their incompetence. This is the party that oversaw the shambolic Brexit deal that hit farming communities hard. Absolutely. Not only that, Mr. Speaker, this was happening alongside the sleaze that countless people across the country will no doubt remember so well. £1.4 billion of wasted taxpayer money on dodgy COVID contracts given to Tory mates over WhatsApp, and partying while the country was in lockdown. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, rural communities gave their damning verdict on these 14 years at the general election, sending Conservatives to the opposition benches and returning more rural Labour MPs than ever before. Madam Deputy Speaker, while the members opposite continue to protest, we will get on with clearing up their mess. The rural economy already contributes. The rural economy already contributes £259 billion to gross value added in England alone, and we know that rural areas offer significant potential for further growth. The Government is committed to harnessing this potential to ensure that we can fully realise the opportunities that exist in the rural economy across the whole country. Small and medium-sized businesses are the engine room of the Government's #1 mission, which is growth, and there are 500,000 registered SMEs in rural areas, the vast majority of them actually not having anything to do with agriculture or farming. Madam Deputy Speaker, the SME plan, which was launched by the Prime Minister last summer, represents the most comprehensive package of support for small and medium-sized businesses in a generation. The plan will make a real difference to the day-to-day trading operations of small businesses. This includes a new business growth service and a massive £4 billion finance boost to increase access to finance for entrepreneurs and make Britain the best place to start and grow a business. Madam Deputy Speaker, a prosperous rural economy requires effective transport as well as digital infrastructure, the availability of affordable housing and energy, and access to a healthy and skilled workforce. We are tackling those issues. We know that rural residents often have to travel further to access work, education, training, healthcare and other essential services. Now, the Conservatives made this worse by slashing local bus routes in England by 50%, with more than 8,000 services slashed in their time in office. Rural transport, no, I'm getting on with my speech. Madam Deputy Speaker, there are very, very many members of the opposition that wish to speak, and I don't want to take their time up. Rural transport under them became a postcode lottery. Well, perhaps the Honourable Lady would let me make my point before she gets up and asks me a question. Rural transport under the Tories became a postcode lottery where the price of many communities was no reliable bus service at all. Under Labour, the Bus Services Act 2025 places passenger needs, reliable services and local accountability at the heart of the industry by putting power over local bus services back into the hands of local leaders across England. We are reconnecting our local communities again by protecting socially necessary bus services and the most vulnerable. We are rebuilding connectivity and confidence in our countryside using... we are rebuilding... I give way to the Honourable Gentleman.
For her giving way, for the Minister giving way. She talks about rural transport. Does she not recognise that enhanced partnerships run by Conservative county councils in Norfolk and in Essex have increased transport usage, bus usage, by more than anywhere else in the country because they're working with the private sector, not against it?
Madam Deputy Speaker, we are not working against the private sector, but I hope the Honourable Gentleman will recognise the Conservative record in this area. A 50% cut in the availability of bus services across the country, often made worse in rural areas which lost their buses completely. We know that rural areas are benefiting from Labour's changes, for example, York and North Yorkshire. Well, I'll give way to the Honourable Gentleman.
Shimmered in here, so I'm grateful for the Minister giving way. She's talking about important subjects for all of our communities: infrastructure, SMEs, transport. We can differ on who's to be praised or not praised, but on the issue of priorities for the government, legislative priorities, and many of these things require legislation, or legislative time has already been spent on it. Why is it that the government are going to spend so much time on banning trail hunting?
Yeah, what's the point?
And is she aware that in Shropshire alone, if that goes through, we're likely to see the death of 300 dogs, 300 hounds, at least? And that will impact on many, many rural SMEs. She will know, because she's been in the House a very long time, I've had at least 3 animal welfare bills in this House long before the Honourable Gentleman even set foot in this chamber. So my record on animal welfare is long and established. So I today stand up for all of those people in the hunts who do not want to destroy all of those dogs as well as jobs.
Well, I'd like to reply to the Honourable Gentleman firstly by paying tribute to his record on animal welfare, because I think everyone across the House respects it. Secondly, I'd like to say I actually was in the House when we voted to ban hunting in the first place. I was actually in this chamber when it was invaded by hunt protesters who didn't show much attention to the law when they ran into this place and were so surprised they'd arrived here they didn't quite know what to do when they got here. So I take no lessons on any of that. The ban on trail hunting was in our manifesto, and we are consulting on how to put it into effect, and I certainly hope that the Honourable Gentleman will take part in that consultation. And let us, he may vote any way he likes, but I hope he'll take part in the consultation, and so we can have a proper debate about these things. I'm happy to give way to them.
Well, to the Minister, I'm interested to know how keen she is to adhere to that distinct element of the Labour Party's manifesto, because it seems quite clear to rural communities up and down Scotland and elsewhere on these islands, that it's a pick and mix. They introduced things that were never in the manifesto, and they failed to deliver that which was. So when did it become such an important compass for this minister?
We are only in the 18th month of the 5 years of the Parliament, so he should be patient.
I thank my right honourable friend for giving way. Bournemouth is a town of animal lovers, and it's received the news that the government is bringing forward animal welfare reforms with very great happiness. I wonder if the Minister could outline what some of those reforms would be and how it would particularly benefit our rural communities.
Well, certainly, I mean, the animal welfare strategy is a very comprehensive one, as honourable members will know. It encompasses farm animals, wild animals, pets, as well as international trade and all of those aspects. It certainly also looks at what can be done to enforce a ban on hare coursing, which is particularly brutal, and I was happy that the Right Honourable Lady supported that aspect. But it happens all the time. This is the point. I said enforcing the ban. I didn't say banning, I said enforcing the ban. We can have the best laws in the world. If none of them are enforced, we might as well not bother. And I have to say, the honourable gentleman, perhaps he should be patient and let me finish my sentence. The honourable gentleman should be well aware that the record of the party opposite in government on enforcement was absolutely dire, because a lot of enforcement activities were actually decimated by the cuts that they enforced in the period of austerity. I have to give way to the honourable.
I thank the Minister for giving way. She's been very generous with her time. I want to ask her about the previous government's cuts to the Environment Agency, which had a huge impact on parts of my constituency, or just beyond my constituency, where we've had fly tipping on an industrial level that's leaked into the rivers and streams in my constituency and caused a huge amount of damage.
Exactly right. And the cuts that were made to enforcement activities have caused many huge problems that we are attempting to clear up. For example, the 20% rise in waste crime, the fact that our enforcement activities and the enforcement muscle for a lot of the benefits that we expect and the requirements that we expect to keep our rivers free and our wildlife healthy were in effect not properly enforced during the austerity years. Now, I'm a fair person, so I'm going to give way to the Honourable Gentleman.
Giving way. And actually, isn't the argument she's making, if it's about enforcement, it is already illegal to hunt with dogs. Therefore, you need more resources for our rural community to enforce what is legal or illegal. So take the example of Leicestershire, for example. We instituted a rural crime team in 2019 and have seen rural crime drop by 23%. My worry is that if the government has its way, that funding will disappear and therefore rural crime and enforcement will get worse. Can she square that circle for me? And is she speaking to the Home Office to make sure rural communities get the policing and the funding they need for that rural policing?
Yeah. Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, I know a few people at the Home Office, and in fact, when I was there before the reshuffle, we did actually launch the Rural Crime Task Force, which is doing great work and will carry on doing so. So I agree that the Honourable Gentleman is right that enforcement needs to be properly funded and not slashed as it was under the party opposite. So I was talking, Madam Deputy Speaker, about improving local transport links and pointing out that we have a multi-year investment working with local authorities to provide a much better service in our rural areas. And we know that rural areas are already benefiting from the changes in the Bus Services Act. For example, in York and North Yorkshire, the Labour Combined Authority is developing a rural bus franchising model to improve connectivity for villages that currently see only one bus per week. Madam Deputy Speaker, one bus per week, that's the kind of legacy that we have from the party opposite in the areas they purport to support. We know that bus services in rural areas can be a lifeline for many, providing the only means of getting around, which is why in our multi-year allocations for local authorities, we've revised the formula to include a rurality element for the first time, ensuring that the additional challenges of running services in rural areas are taken into account. The Conservatives slashed local bus routes. We are putting them back, protecting them and promoting them.
Minister for giving way. The local government finance settlement is a huge problem for rural local authorities. In Shropshire, we've had 16 years of Conservative mismanagement. We have surging social care demand, and our allocation has been cut in cash terms over the next 3 years. The black hole is unfillable, and a Section 114 notice looks very likely for us. Will she speak to her colleagues in MHCLG so that we can sort out this desperate problem for rural authorities?
Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm happy to pass on the Honourable Lady's comments to the appropriate ministers. Access to digital services is crucial for rural areas. We're delivering high-speed capable broadband to UK premises that are not included in suppliers' commercial plans. Our aim is to achieve 99% of coverage of reliable, super-fast, high-speed broadband by 2032. Over 1 million further premises have been... Well, let me develop my point, please. Over 1 million further premises have been included within contracts to provide access to superfast broadband, with funding of over £1.8 billion allocated in the latest spending review to support this project. This helps end social isolation, provides access to health care and turbocharges rural businesses. Our focus on rural, hard-to-reach areas ensures that the benefits of superfast broadband reach every corner of the UK, breaking down barriers that the Conservative government failed to address. Now, I must say, well, go on then.
I thank the Minister for giving away. Only 40% of my constituency have gigabit broadband, and it's a major impact. Does the Minister understand how detrimental moving the 2030 target to the 2032 target is? And I will have many constituents that still will not be able to connect to the internet.
The problem is what we inherited was a system where all the hardest to reach bits had been left to last. And so we are trying now by investing 1.8 billion to try to get that sorted. But I understand the honourable gentleman's frustration.
For giving way. Wessex Internet, which was founded by the late James Gibson Fleming, has done some great work in Dorset, Wiltshire, Hampshire, Somerset. But I'm finding that in Dorset, the vouchers that are given out to areas that aren't included aren't available. And we've challenged this many, many times with the Ministry. I wonder if she would mind having a look and seeing if we can get the vouchers rolled out again in everywhere that needs them.
Well, if she would get me information, I'll make sure that I pass it on to the relevant minister and make sure that we cover the point that the Honourable Lady makes. I must say, Madam Deputy Speaker, I was astonished to see that the Conservatives have pledged to scrap the Climate Change Act in the face of opposition from one of their own former Prime Ministers, the Baroness May, who called their plans a catastrophic mistake. This government is committed to achieving clean power by 2030, whilst the Conservatives would leave us dangerously reliant on Putin's oil. Labour's ambitious clean power mission will create good jobs in rural areas, protect bill payers and ensure our energy security. Well-designed and well-managed solar farms have the potential to deliver a range of environmental benefits, with some solar farms delivering significantly more than the mandatory 10% increase in habitats required by biodiversity net gain. I've given way quite a lot, so I'm going to carry on and get on with my speech. We know that the rollout of solar generation does not pose a risk to food security. Planning guidance makes clear that developers should utilise brownfield land wherever possible. Where agricultural land must be used, lower quality land should be preferred. We also encourage multifunctional land use and are encouraged to see plenty of farmers ignoring the hysteria of those opposite and combining sustainable energy generation with arable and livestock farming. Well, perhaps if the Honourable Lady had calmed down, I might have time to... The total land area, the total area of land... The total area of land currently used for solar is less than 0.1% of UK land. Communities are providing a service to the country when they host clean energy infrastructure, so there needs to be a benefit for them. Through the Clean Power Action Plan, we've made it clear that where communities host clean energy infrastructure, we will ensure that they benefit from it. There are already voluntary community benefit funds running across the country, like for the offshore wind farm at Norfolk Boroughs, that has a community fund worth over £15 million. In addition, the government has already announced bill discounts for communities living nearest to new electricity transmission infrastructure and published guidance on community funds for electricity transmission infrastructure and onshore wind in England. After a decade of Tory cuts to frontline policing, this government is also committed to driving down rural crime, whether somewhat... Well, again, I'm only just starting about... Well, go on then.
I'm really grateful to her because this is a really important point. And before she elaborates on policing cuts, what is her take on the Labour Police and Crime Commissioner's funding gap that has emerged, that means that areas such as the West Midlands will now have less police officers than they did in 2010?
There are going to be 3,000 more police officers on the beat this year, Madam Deputy Speaker, which is far more than her government managed after slashing 20,000 at the beginning of their time in office. This government is determined to crack down on rural crime. Last year, we published the Rural and Wildlife Crime Strategy, collaborating with the National Police Chiefs Council. This strategy is a vital step in our mission to deliver safer streets everywhere, and that includes in rural areas, and comes as we give the police new powers to take on the organised criminal gangs targeting the agricultural sector. Only last year, rural policing teams have recovered more than £12.7 million worth of stolen farm machinery, leading to 155 arrests, and interestingly, some of it turned up abroad, so there's clearly an organised crime element to this which needs tackling properly. It would be impossible to discuss rural... Happy to.
Can I join her in congratulating the work of our rural crime teams, and can I invite her in particular to pay tribute to Special Constable Susan Holliday, who has served almost 40 years as a Special Constable and was awarded the British Empire Medal in the New Year's Honour, and I would be delighted to invite her to my Carlisle constituency to meet Susan Holliday.
Add my congratulations to Susan Holliday. She sounds like a remarkable person, and it's really good that she's been recognised for the work that she's done in her own local community. I think it'd be impossible to discuss rural communities without paying tribute to the vital work, Madam Deputy Speaker, undertaken by this country's farmers. Supporting British farmers and boosting the nation's food security are key priorities for the government. Now, I understand that farmers don't just produce nutritious food, they also need to make a profit, and the margins of farm businesses are often tight, but we're taking action to help farms prosper. We commissioned Baroness Minette-Batters to undertake an independent farming profitability review and published this last year. We've announced our new Farming and Food Partnership Board, which will bring together voices from farming, food, retail and finance to drive profitability, support homegrown British produce and remove barriers to investment. Whilst the party opposite failed to spend £300 million of the farming budget, we are investing £11.5 billion over this Parliament into nature-friendly farming. Whilst they sold out our farmers in trade deals with New Zealand and Australia, we are unlocking new markets for British produce in India, China and the United States. We are committing £200 million up to 2030 through Farming Innovation Programme grants to improve productivity and to trial new technologies. And there is a really exciting agenda of development out there in this particular area. And we've appointed Alan Laidlow as the first ever Commissioner for Tenant Farming, giving tenant farmers a stronger voice than ever before. We have continued to listen and engage with the farming community and family businesses about reforms to inheritance tax, Having carefully considered this feedback, we are going further to exempt more farms and businesses from the requirement to pay inheritance tax, whilst maintaining the core principle that more valuable agricultural and business assets should not receive unlimited relief. This is why we are increasing the inheritance tax threshold from 1 million to 2.5 million. Couples can now pass on up to 5 million without paying inheritance tax on their assets. This will halve the number of estates claiming agricultural property relief, paying more in 2026-7, including those claiming businesses' property relief. And the remaining 185 estates affected in 2026-27, 145 will pay less than when the allowance was set at £1 million. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, let us be absolutely clear about what this Tory motion really is. It's not a plan for rural Britain, and it's not a serious attempt to fix the problems our rural communities face. It's an exercise in political distraction. Every single regret that's listed in this motion is the direct result of decisions taken by the party opposite over their 14 disastrous years in government. They regret raising taxes after crashing the economy and blowing a hole in the public finances. They regret business closures after years of stagnant growth, poor investment and broken rural infrastructure. They regret changes to funding for rural areas after hollowing out public services, cutting rural transport and stripping away neighbourhood policing in the very places where visibility and response times matter the most. They regret the changes to the rural way of life but sold out our farmers in trade deals, broke their funding promises, and even their own former DEFRA Secretary of State admitted that they failed to defend our agricultural interests. They regret uncertainty when it was their chopping and changing, their political chaos and their lack of long-term thinking that created it in the first place. Rural communities deserve honesty, not selective political amnesia, and from this government, Madam Deputy Speaker, they will get it.
The original question was as on the order paper. Since when an amendment has been proposed as on the order paper? The question is that the original words stand part of the question. I call the Liberal Democrat spokesperson Sarah Dyke.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's a pleasure to speak for the Liberal Democrats in this motion. Around 10 million people live in rural areas, and the rural population has been growing faster than urban areas since the mid-2020s. However, under successive governments, rural communities have largely been viewed as an afterthought in policy. Yet rural areas present a wealth of opportunities which need to be optimised, because if the government really wants growth, then rural areas should and can play their part. After more than a year of uncertainty and anguish since the 2024 budget that threatened to wreck family farms across the country, the government have partially climbed down on the family farm tax. This concession is down to the continued and sustained campaigning of the thousands of farmers who didn't give up and made their voices heard. These voices I know because they are family members, friends, and they're my neighbours. I have stood in solidarity with them as they took precious time away from their farms to attend Westminster rallies in protest of this ill-thought-through policy. For them, this is not a triumph. This has been a hard-fought fight to save their livelihoods, their homes and their futures. This fight is about the justice and security, because if we undermine British farmers, we undermine our ability to provide food to feed the nation, to keep us secure in a volatile and uncertain world. Britain is not secure unless food supply is secure.
I wonder if the Honourable Lady would
But-
agree on that point.
Yes, of course I
I
will.
entirely endorse what she said about the family farm tax and the campaign that was waged against it, which cost actually a number of political parties. Will she go further, though, and now join the campaign that's certainly raging on our side of the chamber against the imposition of huge solar plants and pylons of substations on prime agricultural land? 35% of the land in this country is not of that kind. Surely those things should go there.
Thank the right honourable gentleman for his intervention. Renewable energy is absolutely vital for the future of this country. However, we must ensure that renewable energy is placed in the right place and is fit for the future. Putting renewable energy on best and most versatile land certainly isn't the way that the Liberal Democrats would look at it. However, there is places for renewable energy, and I certainly endorse a lot more solar on rooftops, and that is certainly something that we can do for the future. I thank him for his intervention. Going back to the family farm tax, the impact of this tax has already been felt. Chris, who farms at Wheatlawn Farm near Banbury, wrote to me recently. He's a fifth-generation farmer. He has terminal prostate cancer and described the family farm tax as a dark shadow which has been hanging over him for the past year. He was terrified of leaving his son with a huge unpayable tax bill. But while the financial burden might be avoided for now, Chris was still keen to point out that what little trust he may have had in the Labour government, it's now been lost because, in his words, the Labour Party simply doesn't understand the countryside. Ministers are fond of saying that British farming is the best in the world, and they are right, but too many of them don't know why. The reason, Madam Deputy Speaker, is because of farmers like Chris and the tradition of family farming in the UK. So while common sense has finally prevailed, does the Chancellor recognise the damage this whole dreadful episode has had on the rural economy? And when will the Treasury publish an impact assessment of this policy on the agricultural sector? Because while the partial climb down has limited the damage to the industry, it doesn't eradicate it entirely. Many farmers will still find themselves facing huge tax bills while operating on narrow profit margins. And we Liberal Democrats were the first party to call out and oppose the unfair family farm tax after the disastrous 2024 budget, and we will continue to stand alongside the farming community and demand that the government scraps this unfair tax in full. And if they refuse, we will submit amendments to the finance bill to bring it down. So alongside food production, farmers are the guardians of the countryside, but they can't be green if they are in the red. They are critical to meeting DEFRA's legally binding targets to reverse nature's decline. So they need time to adapt and clarity about what to aim for profitable and nature-friendly farming. So as the government prepares its new farming roadmap, we Liberal Democrats encourage them to make it practical, not theoretical, because the UK should align with our partners in the EU. And given that the EU is maintaining direct payments to farmers until the cap until at least 2034, we need to ensure that English agriculture is not an outlier, especially given that Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland are also retaining an element of direct support. While farmers in England are left with agri-environmental schemes that under a Labour government are no longer comprehensively open to farmers, because it's the first time in 80 years that a government has not provided support to produce food. Now, this is Tory policy. It's been continued by Labour, and it's absolute madness to disincentivise food production, so that I hope today, perhaps, it's the opportunity for the Conservatives to apologise for failing to treat food as a public good. Madam Deputy Speaker, we need to ensure British farmers have a fair deal. And we can do this by adding an extra £1 billion to the farming budget, guaranteeing high standards in all future trade deals, and renegotiate the Australia and New Zealand trade deals, enforcing point of origin and point of production labelling on animal-derived products, and giving the Groceries Code adjudicator the teeth it needs to both protect customers and producers, and securing frictionless trade with Europe through new veterinary and plant health agreements. I will give way.
Thank you for giving way, and I think rather than just criticising the government, I think it's great that she's outlining a set of policies
that the Lib Dems would take forward to support farming communities. But what's not clear is how these would be funded. So that list of policies you listed there, can you talk about how much it would all cost, what the impact on the economy would be, and how they would be funded?
For his intervention, the Liberal Democrats have set out a number of different policies to help shape that £1 billion investment into, and being part of the customs union would certainly be part of that. But that would bring in billions of pounds extra, as he well knows. And there's much more that we can do. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, nothing has done more to increase the cost of living, the cost of farming and the reduction of farm incomes than the Conservative botched Brexit, which made it more expensive and more burdensome for British farmers and fishers to export to their main markets in the EU, beleaguering their workforce and undermining their protections for animal welfare and the environment. And so began a dangerous precedent set by the Conservatives in government for future trade agreements in what they negotiated and how they went about it. They stripped away parliamentary scrutiny and forced terrible deals through which gave unfair advantage to imports from countries with poor standards over the higher quality standards of British farmers. Liberal Democrats... Yes, I will.
Thank you very much for giving way. We've heard an awful lot of criticism about the government's policies towards farming. Very little mention from the Conservatives about the trade deals that they secured with Australia and New Zealand, which have made things so much harder for farmers. But you'll hear a lot of that from Labour, no doubt. I wonder if my honourable friend will join me in asking the government to commit to rejecting chlorinated chicken and hormone-treated beef from the United States.
I thank my honourable friend for that intervention, and I totally agree with him, as he would expect. Liberal Democrats want to ensure British farmers operate on a level playing field and that they can succeed. And that is why last year, I introduced the Dairy Products and Dairy Farming Bill. We have seen farmgate milk prices plummet over the last few months. Now cereal prices are also under serious pressure. Liberal Democrats are clear. We need fairness in the supply chain, because when farming businesses fail, there's a knock-on impact to local hospitality, pubs, cafes, restaurants and hotels. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, Somerset is a tourist region. It supports nearly 10% of all jobs and contributes over £1 billion to the regional economy. Many of the fantastic hospitality businesses in Glastonbury and Somerton are under immense pressure as they face huge rates increases from April. Madam Deputy Speaker, Miranda contacted me today. She manages the White Hart pub in Castle Carey and faces her rateable value going from around £19,000 a year to over £30,000 a year. So while the British Institute of Innkeeping state that only 1 in 3 pubs are profitable, they've warned that this could drop to 1 in 10 by April. The hospitality sector already faces a £4.5 billion in additional taxes due to the increased NICs from the 2024 budget. But the Liberal Democrats have been calling for an emergency 5% VAT cut for hospitality accommodation and attraction businesses until April 2027, funded by a new windfall tax on big banks. Combined with our policy to reduce people's energy bills by removing the main renewable levy, we could put £270 back into people's pockets, making it more affordable to heat their home and allowing them to spend more on occasional extras. This would help drive economic growth in rural areas, restore our high streets and give the country a much-needed morale boost. It would also help rural areas to grow the economy. Madam Deputy Speaker. Yes, I will, my honourable neighbour.
I'm grateful to my neighbour for giving way. I share with her the idea of seeing a reduction in VAT for our rural hospitality sector. But does she not get the irony that such a reduction would be illegal if we were still a member of the European Union? I think there's many ironies, but I think
think the cost-benefit of being in the European Union far outweighs. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, going on to homes, to help grow the economy, we also need to ensure rural areas have places for people to live in. In Somerset, newly built homes make up just 3% of all properties recently sold, with an average price of 20% more expensive than the UK average, while rural house prices have increased by 57% since 2013, while wages simply stagnate, creating an affordability gap and contributing to a higher need for affordable housing in rural areas than in urban settings. As a result, many first-time buyers and key workers simply can't afford to live in rural areas, making it increasingly difficult for rural local businesses to retain staff, reducing local spending power and threatening the viability of our rural communities. The Liberal Democrats are clear, both the private and social housing markets are too expensive and insecure, with the current provisions simply not being sufficient to meet demand. People in holiday destinations shouldn't have to face higher rents and housing shortages, especially when they are among the hardest hit by the cost of living crisis. Madam Deputy Speaker, the Tories would offer tax cuts on second homes, making it harder for the people who want to live in an area that they work or where their family are from to own their own home. This simply evidences their failure to understand what life is really like in rural areas. So, as a part of a fairer housing system, Liberal Democrats would allow councils to increase council tax on second homes by up to 500% if there are housing shortages in their area. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, Liberal Democrats believe the government must recognise the pressure that they themselves have put on rural communities over the last 18 months, whether it be the family farm tax, the broken agri-environment schemes, the lack of support for hospitality and the failure to provide affordable rural homes. But we must remember these are not new problems. The Conservatives failed to make improvements for rural communities, and that is why they were kicked out amongst the huge swathes of the rural southwest. Thank you.
And with an immediate 3-minute time limit, Michelle Welsh.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm incredibly proud of the agriculture element of our rural communities. In Sherwood Forest, we have lots of local farms that are part of our community and at the heart of rural life. It is vital that we hear their concerns and ensure that these local British businesses can prosper and thrive. From Oliver Collingham to Richard Boff to Michael Prendergast and Colin Bower, the constituency of Sherwood Forest has farmers, along with their families, who are dedicated, hard-working, decent people trying to make a living managing our countryside. They've had to battle for 12 months on inheritance tax, and I'm incredibly pleased that the government have listened, but we must continue to listen. Farming is under pressure. Some of the main challenges raised to me by local farmers include persistent rural crime, limited policing capacity, low farm profitability, low morale, workforce insecurity, biosecurity risks linked to imports, and uncertainty around farm schemes and long-term policy stability. On rural crime, farmers tell me that they are reporting persistent and escalating crime, including organised poaching gangs on quad bikes who at night are damaging livestock, fencing and intimidating farmers and gamekeepers. This is understandably causing significant risk to safety and animal welfare, as well as costing farmers for product, land, equipment and property. It is unsustainable for many farms for this issue to continue without prevention. The police are already overstretched, and without support from government with frontline enforcement and prevention, the situation will only get worse. Madam Deputy Speaker, I would like to also emphasise the need for every police force to adequately recall rural crime and to treat it seriously. The livelihood and safety of local farmers and community deserve nothing less. I therefore ask that the government issues a mandate to all police forces, including in Nottinghamshire, that isn't currently doing it, to record rural crime and provide regular reports that will guide resources to where it needs to be. Can I ask the Minister to speak to their Home Office colleagues about a clear mandate on reporting of rural crime and about the current support for Nottinghamshire Police and direct additional resources specifically for rural policing and rural crime? The increases of rural crime is compounding with existing concerns with farm viability, low returns and workforce pressures affecting business confidence and employment stability. Very low commodity prices are squeezing margins, and many are worried about maintaining sustainable wages for staff. If we are truly committed to... I will.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Could I thank my honourable friend? She's making an excellent speech, and could I just ask her to perhaps comment also on the importance of rural bus services in terms of mobility of local staff in rural areas, and in particular to commend the work by Labour mayors on bus franchising and the work of Nottingham buses and Reading buses in providing excellent rural routes.
Yeah, I thank him for the comments. Certainly in my constituency, rural transport, including bus services, are not how they should be at the moment. And I know the East Midlands Clare Ward is actually having a conversation about that across the East Midlands with regards to improving it. If we are truly committed to supporting our local farms, we must ensure that there are jobs available and the morale is high enough that people will want to have them. I would like to mention the current uncertainty around government schemes, particularly the lack of clarity on sustainable farming incentive scheme and payment certainty and capital grant availability. Perhaps the Minister could offer some insight into further long-term plans or announcements on support schemes for farms. We often say that small family farms are the backbone of rural communities, and they definitely are, but we need targeted support to ensure that they remain viable and we do not lose them. Finally, an issue that is raised to me by farmers is the serious concern about disease entering the UK. Could the Minister reassure me and local farmers that they are working to ensure there are effective controls on imported meat and that UK production and food standards are not undermined by imported goods that do not meet the same standards? Rural communities are not a museum piece and farming is not a hobby. They are the backbone of our country. If we fail our farmers, we cut off villages from transport, jobs and services. We don't just damage the countryside, we weaken Britain itself. Supporting rural communities is not a charity, it is a duty, and it's a duty this country must finally honour. Behind every field is a family, behind every farm is a future.
Sir Julian Smith.
Madam Deputy Speaker, you know as a Bradford MP how sparse North Yorkshire is, the largest rural road network in England, historic funding, special funding for rural schools, and almost all employment coming from small businesses and hospitality. Huge efforts were made by the last government to save businesses in agricultural areas during COVID, through the bounce back loans and other loans. But COVID hit in the context of long-term pressures, existing pressures, farming undervalued, village shops closing, rural schools consolidating or federating, post offices going, churches shutting. In spite of this, communities worked hard to both fight these trends and to continue to maintain the fabric of their local societies, coffee mornings, clubs, support for older people. In the shadow of COVID, Madam Deputy Speaker, with the other pressures facing rural communities, the new government had a responsibility to tread really carefully with this part of our country. But as we've seen with the farms tax, what has happened since the election are a series of hammer blows on our rural communities. Massive stress to small farms that rely on intergenerational leadership to survive. The Employment Rights Bill, with many more burdens on small businesses, disproportionately hits areas like North Yorkshire. These businesses have fantastic ways of managing employee relationships, informal but robust, but without the need for even more contractual arrangements. The removal of the Rural Services Grant, and now the removal of the bad weather adjustment in the local government financing settlement. On transport, fuel duty scrapped, the drink driving laws changes, and now this loss of reliefs for public houses. £26,000 is the average increase in rates cost for pubs in North Yorkshire. And even the new Mayor of North Yorkshire, Labour Mayor, hammering the tourism industry with a tourism chat. These places, Madam Deputy Speaker, provide a place to meet in rural areas. They provide events for old people. They fundraise for local causes. We've heard earlier they provide jobs for the increasing number of people leaving college without opportunities. Madam Deputy Speaker, farmers small businesses, pubs, hospitality venues, all just trying to make a reasonable turn using their private capital, but under such massive pressure from this government. I urge ministers to move quickly on the valuations issue, to triple-check parts of the local government settlement, and I also urge it to reset its relationship with rural communities within government and Whitehall, develop a cumulative impact test for these communities, and avoid the missteps we've seen so far in the past year.
Jermy.
Very much. I may be biased, but I believe Norfolk is a beautiful place to grow up and grow old in. It is the place where I was born and raised, and it's where I call home. Like so many rural communities, it is a place that values cooperation, community and compassion. But for so many years, those values were tested because we saw Conservative cuts to the very services that bind our communities together without thought for the long-term implications. In Norfolk, we saw cuts driven by the Conservative government and enacted by the Conservative County Council. Cuts to our children's services and to our youth outdoor education facilities being just a few examples of this insidious decline. One of the industries that underpins so many of our rural communities is, of course, farming. And in a debate about rural communities, we must recognise that farming is in crisis. And whilst the party opposite may be keen to suggest that this is something new, the reality is the decline started many years ago and got worse under their watch. And of particular concern to me is that fewer farms will mean bigger farms, and the further industrialisation of farming would trigger the next wave of rural decline. Because it is the farm that is so integral to rural life, with farmers so often at the core. Who is it that serves on the parish councils, the internal drainage boards? Who helps to sponsor the football club or the cricket club? Who gets the cars out of the ditches or the snow off the lanes, as we have seen just this week? It's hard to quantify this value. You cannot record it on a balance sheet, but I see it and I feel it, and I know many honourable members do as well. Farmers in my constituency remember all too well the failures of the past Tory government and the lack of progress over so many years. And here we are today in a debate about rural issues. And if you read the motion, and actually the text of the motion, not a single mention of our NHS. Nothing about public services. Nothing about public services like adult social care. No mention of dentistry. Do rural people not get ill? Do they not grow old? Do they not? Of course.
Friend, for giving way. All of the chuntering and laughing from the opposition benches rather indicates that they feel that the...
Address the chair. Go on.
Sorry. All of the chuntering...
Can I remind members that I can't call their names if I can't see their faces, even if it's an intervention?
Apologise, Madam Deputy Speaker. Does my honourable friend agree that the chuntering... Does my honourable friend agree that the chuntering and laughter, which they continue now, rather belies the fact that they seem not to agree that rural members of the public in rural areas benefit from the very public services that were so decimated by 14 years of failure?
I think it's very telling. I completely agree with my honourable friend. No wonder the Tories don't want to speak about their record on public services and the NHS, because I would point out to members opposite, when the first league table for hospitals was published last year, it showed that my local hospital, the Queen Elizabeth in King's Lynn, at the very bottom, the worst hospital in the country, not in some large city, but in rural Norfolk. The hospital that can serve the constituents of people who, until recently, had a Conservative Prime Minister, albeit fleetingly, was badly let down, and also served by a Conservative Health Secretary. They allowed our hospital, like our health services, more generally to wither and decline. Norfolk's other hospitals were not far behind, and the East of England Ambulance Trust, the rural county of Eastern Region, the worst ambulance trust in the country, and the Mental Health Trust not far behind. Rural communities remember all too well the decline they experienced under 14 years of Conservative government, and like the rest of the country, they voted for change last year at the general election. The largest swing in 2024, they voted for change. And it was in my seat, a rural seat, that recorded the greatest swing from Conservative to Labour at a general election ever. The complete repudiation of the Conservatives' performance in rural areas. I say to the Minister that there are huge growth opportunities in rural areas and people are yearning for change. I urge the Government to tap into these opportunities and allow our progressive Labour values to transform our green and pleasant lands.
Yeah. Sir Geoffrey Clifton-Brown.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I wish to start by declaring an interest as a farmer and chairman of the All-Party Shooting and Conservation Group. Yeah. Rural communities like the Cotswolds feel totally neglected by this government. We talk about the cost of living, but the cost of rural living is even higher. The family farm tax, the rise in national insurance contribution, food bills, water bills, heating bills, business rates. I could go on, Madam Deputy Speaker. Just before the recess, the government stealthily announced the local government funding settlement, which included cuts for Gloucestershire County Council, whereas many urban authorities have seen an increase. Under the so-called fairer funding three-year review, Gloucestershire County Council will have a gap of £10 million in 26-7, 20 million in 27-28 and 30 million in 29-30. As a result, Gloucestershire will have to rely on higher council tax, including a higher police precept. They will no doubt also have cuts in services as well. In addition to all of that, Madam Deputy Speaker, my constituents also face inadequate funding for education. We are in the bottom 20% nationally funding per pupil. This is unfair on our children. The family farm tax was a cruel policy. I am pleased that the government have finally listened after 14 months and have compromised on this tax. Even though the threshold has been increased to 2.5 million, this policy will still break up farms. And is the 300 million to be raised to the Treasury really worth the destruction of the farming community? Food resilience must be the top priority. It is astonishing that the government cancelled the Food Resilience Annual Report to Parliament, and I asked them to reinstate it.
I wonder if my right honourable friend will give way on that.
Happily give way.
My honourable friend is, as ever, making a valuable contribution to our considerations. Does he recognise that energy security and food security should not be made competitors? We need to invest in energy security, of course, but not at the expense of the most fertile, valuable farmland of the country, which we need to grow enough food to feed the nation.
I'm grateful to my right honourable friend for that intervention. As a chartered surveyor who has studied rural properties and farms, we should not be putting wind farms or photovoltaics on the best farmland in this country. Yes, I will give way to my name.
The honourable gentleman for giving way. The wording of the motion seems to imply that the Conservatives are against any and all renewables in the countryside. But even the most ardent opponents of an oversized industrial-scale solar farm in my constituency of the South Cotswolds would still support rooftop solar. So I would be very grateful if the honourable member, the right honourable member, would please clarify this point, whether indeed the Conservatives are against all renewables in countryside.
So little time, but my neighbour uncharacteristically didn't clearly listen to what I said, which was we shouldn't put them on the best farmland in this country. In the North Cotswold, hospitality produces an estimated 220 million to the local economy, and we know that rising business rates are going up on average by 32,000. On average, 2 pubs a day are closing. They are literally being taxed out of existence. We shouldn't be banning trail hunting, which adds 100 million to the rural economy. I am lucky enough to represent some of the most famous hunts. And if we carry this policy through, how many people will directly or indirectly lose their jobs? How many thousands of hounds will be euthanized to support this unwelcome measure? A further threat is to the shooting industry. Shooting indirectly contributes 3.3 billion to the rural economy, 9 billion to the wider economy. Last year we saw staggering 245% increases in shotgun and firearms certificate bills. But the thing that is worrying the shooting community at the moment is the move from Section 2 to Section 1 for shotguns. This will involve a huge extra bureaucracy, and there is now a BASC petition of well over 1 million signatures opposing this. So I urge the government to reconsider this damaging proposal. And in conclusion, Madam Deputy Speaker, rural Britain is the backbone of our nation, yet it is being systematically disadvantaged by this government. From food resilience to hospitality, from farming to country pursuits, these issues are not niche. They are fundamental to our economy, our environment, and above all, our rural way of life. If we fail to act now, we risk losing not only livelihoods, but the very fabric of our countryside.
Ben Goldsborough.
Deputy Speaker, so I want to focus on three main points today within the rural communities because of South Norfolk now having a Labour MP for the first time since 1950. I think goes to show a really key point for members opposite need to pay attention that there has been a huge change within rural representation within this country, and some humility I think would be welcome on taking these points forward. Now, I want to focus on these three main points, which are healthcare, which weren't mentioned in the actual motion, which I think is something a bit odd, because we do get ill as well within the backbenches on our side as well. Infrastructure is another issue as well that needs to be focused upon, and then finally, obviously, farming within South Norfolk. So to start off with healthcare, this government, to start off with, has invested £9 million for the Norfolk and Norwich University Hospital in my constituency, which makes a huge difference for our local economy, stopping people getting sick, meaning sure that we have the investment we need as well directly onto the ground for our healthcare professionals. But not only that, we've also seen £1.3 million invested into the Cotman Centre, which is a specialist centre for cancer and prevention. The Wyndham Health Centre, my largest market town, has also seen money invested in there. Long Stratton Health Centre as well, and the Cringleford Surgery. Each one of these means that my constituents can live happier, healthier and longer lives because of it. Now, infrastructure. Since my time of being elected the first Labour MP since 1950 to South Norfolk, I've secured over £200 million into the upgrades of the Thickthorn junction of the A11 and A47, something that's been waiting for years for Norfolk to be done, which will directly improve the connectivity of constituencies across Norfolk, including to the Right Honourable Gentleman in Broadland and Fakenham. So these investments will happen directly as well. There's also been £289 million of investment into broadband contracts, which are being rolled out to villages across Norfolk and will make huge differences to me locally as well. And then also there's the Project Gigabit system as well. 131,000 homes have now been connected. Now, farming. This is something that's really important to me because, as the honourable gentleman on the shadow front bench also knows, I've got a slight bit of an obsession with biosecurity in the United Kingdom. This is one thing that we need to take extremely seriously, and I urge my colleagues on the front benches, as I know they have to this point, to continue with the investment into Harlow and other places to ensure that our borders are kept safe, that we are stopping the threat of avian influenza and also African swine fever into the United Kingdom. We cannot continue blindly walking down an alley where we're not protecting our farming industry on that. We also need to be looking at how, going forward, we act more on planning policy on farming as well, such as reservoirs and ensuring that broilers particularly have the easy access of development to help our rural economy.
Charlie Dewhirst.
Deputy Speaker. Now, it very much feels like we are back to the future, or as the Minister has been channeling her inner Charlie XCX, she just wants to go back to 1999, because 27 years later, here we are, with a Labour government at war with the countryside, discussing issues such as hunting, potentially enormously damaging changes to the pig industry, and enormous changes that could affect our countryside and our rural economy. Fresh from the hammer blow of the family farm tax and family business tax over a year ago. And I will take this opportunity to pay tribute to those members on the other side who did quietly campaign against it and have achieved some changes, but whilst the Lord giveth, the Lord also taketh away. So while that news was announced just before Christmas, we also saw the arrival of the government's animal welfare strategy, a document that could have been written by the NGOs and animal rights activists themselves and contains some potentially extraordinarily damaging measures that could indeed harm farming well into the future. Now, these are often technical and quite complex matters. Now, when I mentioned 1999, it's very important to remember what happened. The government, rightly at the time, took a view that sow stalls needed to be phased out. But instead of phasing them out, they banned them overnight and destroyed 50% of the British pig industry. Yeah. So when you look at future animal welfare matters such as farrowing, it is very, very important that the government works with the industry to ensure that any future changes and transition is done so it does not affect our ability to produce fantastic British pork and supports our farmers and ensures British food security. There are other measures that need to be discussed, such as the use of CO2 in stunning. Another technical matter, a matter that needs to be worked with with the food processors and abattoir owners to ensure, once again, that we do not damage our food security. There are lots of other things. My honourable friend, the member for North Cotswold mentioned the issues with shooting and the changes to firearms and shotguns certification and licensing. You said, of course, there are 67,000 people employed. There are over 600,000 people engaged in that industry. It is hugely important to my own constituency of Bridlington, the Wolds, and to neighbouring constituencies like that of my honourable friend, the member for Thirsk and Malton, where a town like Helmsley brings around £1.5 million a week alone from shooting. So very, very important that we take that into account. Also, while I have a moment, I think it's important that we mention the SBS deal. That wonderful thing that is being trumpeted by the government and by the Liberal Democrats, which we sold out our fishing industry for 12 years for something that is yet to be negotiated, and which, if you speak to farming representatives, they will tell you is likely to cost farmers hundreds of millions of pounds and likely to reduce our food production and increase our reliance on imports. Look, I will always stand up for our farming community and for our rural economy, and I commend the motion of the opposition today.
Yeah. Josh Newbury.
We have had a bitterly cold start to 2026, but as always, this week farmers up and down the country have been out in all weathers and all hours helping their neighbours and clearing vital routes. And I'm delighted that just a fortnight ago we had the news that the threshold for agricultural property relief and business property relief, due to come into force in April, has been raised considerably to a total of £5 million for a couple, even if one of them has already passed away. Yep. I very much welcome the fact that this Labour government has listened to the farming community, and I pay tribute to my fellow backbench Labour MPs who raised this privately and constructively for many months before feeling we had to voice our concerns publicly, as well as to the national farmers' unions in all 4 nations and many others for their steadfast and constructive campaigning on this. And above all, I would like to thank the farmers in my constituency who sat down with me and opened up about their very private family matters, as well as their businesses, 2 things that are uniquely intertwined in farming. I know the changes are a huge relief to them. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, one issue that is on our roads that farmers cannot solve is a lack of bus services. Often part of rural life is the services you rely on being further away. But when public transport is non-existent or inadequate, that physical distance becomes deprivation. Most of our villages in Cannock Chase have just an hourly service, and Slitting Mill, as I have mentioned many times in the House, has none at all. I am very proud that the Bus Services Act, which I served on the Bill Committee for, has given local transport authorities the ability to seize the opportunities of franchising and publicly owned bus companies. On Staffordshire, yes, I'll happily give way.
For giving way, villages in my own Shipley constituency, such as Eldwick, Gilstead, Cullingworth, Harden, Wilton, suffer from the same problems with the decline in rural bus services under the Tory government. So will my honourable friend agree with me that it is under this Labour government and the announcements around the Rural Transport Accelerator Fund that are going to restore vital connections to our rural villages?
Madam Deputy Speaker, I very much agree with my honourable friend, but I'm a little envious of her, if I must confess, because she, of course, has the Mayor of West Yorkshire backing up the Labour government and using that investment wisely and hopefully making use of the powers that are introduced in that Act as well. Whereas, as I was about to say, on Staffordshire County Council, the Conservatives took absolutely no interest in this during their time in power, and recent news of Reform UK's cost-cutting review suggests that our bus services will continue to be neglected. Following... Yes, I'll give way very briefly.
My honourable friend and constituency neighbour for his kind words and his campaigning on this issue. As I'm sure he well knows, Rugeley Trent Valley train station serves a very rural area, mainly in my constituency where the footprint of the station is, but it's also the access to the West Coast Main Line for his constituents. That is not accessible by a bus service. And does he agree that actually we should be extending bus travel so that people can get to a train station on a bus and have all the access and all the opportunities that come with that, rather than what we've got at the minute, which is a legacy of Conservative failure?
Absolutely, Madam Speaker. I couldn't agree more with my honourable friend and constituency neighbour, and I would add that Rugeley Trent Valley also doesn't have accessible access either, which is a big issue that the two of us are campaigning hard on and hope to see some progress on this year. Following the shameful revelation that Reform chose a supporter of white supremacy to lead our county council, and the fact that the Doge unit has yet to visit, Reform have just announced a cut of £1 million to concessionary fares in the coming financial year. And transparency clearly is not in their vocabulary, because Reform refuse to say who will be affected by these cuts. You cannot slash £1 million from the concessions relied on by thousands of residents without having an adverse effect on them, particularly in rural communities. Whilst this government is giving councils more money for road repairs and public transport, Reform-led Staffordshire County Council is filling even fewer potholes than the Conservatives did, and bus services are not improving as they should be. Rural communities that were let down by the old Conservative Party are now being let down by the new turquoise Conservative Party. I'd love to have said much more, Madam Deputy Speaker, on mobile phone coverage and healthcare, but I will finish by saying that the clearest ways we can support our rural communities are by standing with our farmers who put food on our tables, ensuring our constituents can get around on reliable buses and access healthcare that is just as good as people in big cities enjoy, because rural Britain is and will always be a vital part of our nation. Thank you.
Dr. Danny Chambers.
Deputy Speaker, one of the best things about the boundary changes at the last general election is that Winchester is now 60% rural, and I've spent many happy years driving around the countryside of the Meon Valley, treating horses. One thing that is very obvious is that the communities, the towns, the villages in rural areas are absolutely cut off in many different ways, because often where there's no mobile signal, there's often no broadband or no fast broadband either. But an added extra pressure over the last few years is that buses are now being cancelled as well. And Madam Deputy Speaker, last year, 2025, I spent a lot of time working with local communities who are trying to save bus services, trying to restore bus services, because they're an absolute lifeline. There was the number 61 bus that was cancelled to Colden Common and Bishop's Waltham. It had been running 100 years. I took the last bus journey. The bus driver was telling me this particular route had been going 100 years, and Hampshire County Council withdrew funding for this bus. It's not only important for people to get to work, to get to school, but it is vital for people's independence. Madam Deputy Speaker, I've met many elderly people who use this bus to get to Winchester for hospital appointments, to go to the doctors, to do their shopping, and they say without this bus they would actually not be able to remain living in the little village. They wouldn't be able to remain living independently. And I think something that hadn't occurred to me was the communities that the buses themselves create. So I met some people, Madam Deputy Speaker, who said that their friends are now on the, they met on the bus, they now go for coffee together, they check up on each other, and they wouldn't have even known each other had they not been on the same bus together. So I would... I've got a lot to say about this bus. I'm only going to talk in 5 seconds. It's not the only bus. I think, although it is amusing, this is something that, the Conservatives and Hampshire County Council have cut funding for these buses. They froze council tax for years. The Conservative government cut funding for the local council, and now local people are paying the price out of very poor financial decisions, and the first thing that is being cut are buses that affect people's everyday life and the individual experience. And it is a real, a good example of poor financial management, and individuals are now paying the price for that.
Woodcock. Thank you very much.
Deputy Speaker, and I'm very proud to be the Member of Parliament for Banbury, where I was born and grew up. And I'm keenly aware that I'm not just the MP for that town. I'm proud to represent the small towns of Clifton Norton, Charlbury, as well as the villages and countryside of North Oxfordshire. Many people in these places put their trust in me and in Labour for the first time. They did so because the Conservative Party lost the trust of the British people in rural areas, just like the rest of the country. People in those areas remember the party opposite dragging them out of the European Union on broken promises to reduce immigration, of a better deal for farmers and of more money for our NHS. They remember a Conservative Prime Minister who partied during lockdown. They remember a chaotic mini-budget that sent mortgages skyrocketing and nearly crashed the economy. I raise all of this because the Tories try and pitch division between rural communities and our towns and cities where there is none. The reality is that while they are different, people in those areas have exactly the same issues and very much the same concerns. The Conservatives left our communities with sky-high NHS waiting lists. They left village schools that were literally crumbling. They left terrible infrastructure and our county and country roads riddled with potholes. They left rivers like the Sherwood and the Glyme clogged with sewage. And today, we've been reminded that they've learnt absolutely nothing. We've learnt that they would do nothing for the residents in Claydon, in my constituency, who are suffering harassment because they complain about their pets being killed, their gardens being wrecked and their children being terrified as dogs and horses from the Warwickshire Hunt run across through their village under the smokescreen of trail hunting. Now, I will acknowledge that the issue of agricultural property relief has caused concern for many farmers. But the chief reason for their concern is not just those changes to tax. They're concerned because they were let down by the Conservative Party for so long. They know that the Conservatives sold out farmers and undercut them in trade deals with New Zealand and Australia.
Will you give way on that point?
Happy to give way.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. It's not just those constituents of Banbury who know that they were let down by the trade deals in Australia and New Zealand. It's the Conservative Party themselves. My Conservative predecessor, does he not agree, said in this House when he was in this House, of the Australia deal, that it wasn't a very good deal for the UK.
I'll just echo the sentiments of my colleague's predecessor. Madam Deputy Speaker, the people in my constituency know, and the farmers in my constituency know that it was the Conservatives who allowed food inflation to run at 19.1%, while they, as farmers, continued to suffer from unfair market practices from supermarkets that prospered rather than the farmers themselves. They know that it was the Conservatives who bottled planning reforms that would make it easier for farm businesses to invest, diversify and to grow. And we also know that the Conservative Party like to pigeonhole people living in rural areas. Now, our villages and our countryside are filled with different people who have one thing in common: their love for where they live and their desire to make it better. They want a government that is committed to fixing and solving those problems, the issues that matter to them, the NHS, schools, the economy. But they also want better buses, they want better connectivity, and they want an end to rural crime. People in villages across my constituency abandoned the Conservatives at the last election, and the reason they did that is because the Conservative Party abandoned them. Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, I can promise you one thing: I won't be.
Deepak.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The irony won't be lost on farmers in Norfolk and across the border in my constituency in Fenland of hearing the member for both South West Norfolk and South Norfolk say how important farming is, having also then voted for the family farm tax. And indeed, that builds on a contradiction we saw at the general election, because the Labour Party said they wanted to offer a new deal for farming. And yet that new deal has... See, if she wants to intervene, she can, rather than shunter, but go ahead.
I thank the honourable member for giving way. I feel slightly less honourable because he's made false accusations about some of my colleagues who absolutely didn't do that.
Would the honourable lady like to withdraw that comment, please?
I suppose so. Inadvertently calling the member dishonoured.
I'd like to think that the honourable lady is not disrespecting me in that comment. Samantha.
Not disrespecting the Deputy Speaker, and I do apologise if it's come across that way. I wish to apologise to the member if I have offended him.
an abstention as opposed to a vote against. But the reality is only one Labour Member of Parliament voted against, and people's voting records are there for all to see. Well, of course, if he wants to also give me more time, I'll take a second intervention.
Thank you very much to the honourable gentleman for giving way. Did he read the article in the Farmers Guardian which highlighted that over 20% of the Conservative backbenchers did not even bother to turn up to vote on the day?
A vote on the day, but the point is he didn't oppose it. It came also through the finance vote as well when there was another opportunity. So there were two opportunities for the House to vote on it. One should look at both votes to determine whether people were for or against, but that's a matter of public record. We've had a number of Opposition Day debates on this, we've had a number of opportunities in the House, and I think people's voting records and their records more widely on the family farm tax are there for all to see. But the point is, there's only a partial U-turn on that, so if he wants to say that he's opposed to the tax, then hopefully he will support future votes to remove the tax entirely, because we've only had a partial U-turn. So there will still be an opportunity for him to go further. But of course that's not the only measure. We've seen the sustained farming incentive scheme abruptly stopped with no notice to farmers. There's no timeline in terms of when that is going to be reopened. We've seen things like the Farm to Fork Summit in number 10 scrapped. An important opportunity for the industry to have the ear of the Prime Minister. We've seen schemes on productivity cut, and there's a whole range of things which the member for Ripon and Skipton spoke about in terms of wider pressures. And that really builds on the fact that in the Labour Party manifesto, page 59, there was only one paragraph on farming. And so the first thing I wanted to do was really turn to that paragraph, because one of the things, the few things the Labour Party committed to, was to say that 50% of food procured by the public sector would be locally sourced or to higher environmental standards. So will the Minister commit to writing to me with a timeline, given a number of months have now passed since that manifesto, to set out what is the implementation for that? Because that is something that can make a real difference to helping the farming community. The second thing I wanted to highlight is the report of Baroness Batters. She is widely respected, I think, across the House and certainly within rural community. She makes 57 recommendations. I think it is regrettable that that was slipped out right at the end of the Parliament Christmas. But it is a serious report that merits serious attention, and I'm sure the Minister would agree. So could she update the House when she winds up on what the timeline is in terms of implementation of those 57 recommendations, given the pressures that colleagues across the House have spoken of? And third, I just wanted to touch on a theme that I think applies to both debates today, because last year was characterised by a number of U-turns that the government was forced to make, where the Prime Minister asked his backbenchers, not just on the family farm tax, but on welfare reform, on the winter fuel allowance, on national insurance, where the previous budget had triumphed the fact that the tax thresholds were not being extended, the freeze, and then this last budget did exactly the opposite. And already we can see a theme, Madam Deputy Speaker, of a number of U-turns that are pretty foreseeable. One of them from the debate we've just had on jury trials, where there's widespread concerns. But again, in farming, we can see a number of areas. But the one I particularly wanted to highlight is regarding rural pubs. And I commend the Telegraph for the campaign that they have launched. But I just want to speak to the very serious concerns that I, and I think many members across the House of all parties, will be hearing from their rural pubs. And I don't support the ban on Labour MPs from pubs. I don't actually personally think that is the right approach. I think pubs are the heart of our communities. They should be a place that bring people together. But I think the government is making a serious mistake, and I just gently say to Labour backbenchers that I foresee it will be another issue on which they are marched up the hill, only for their Prime Minister under pressure to change his mind. I think he'll do it on digital ID, I think he'll do it on jury trials, and I think he will do it on rural pubs, and we can save people a lot of anxiety if the proposals are changed.
Jane Kirkham.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I represent an area that covers a small city, a town and a large rural area. Much of that rural area is the Roseland Peninsula and is also coastal. It was notable when I researched my maiden speech that David Penhaligon wrote about the challenges that threatened rural Cornwall 50 years ago, and they were very similar to the ones today. Roads, pressure on services, hospitals and sewage, lack of housing, summer lets, and the lowest average wage in the country at the time. Many of those this government is already acting upon. Roads are being fixed, buses are better funded, and rural franchising is being piloted in Cornwall. Railways are being nationalised, and rail fares are being frozen, and bus fares too. Housing, we have 39 billion for social housing and a renters' rights bill, so tenants can no longer be evicted to have their homes flipped to be holiday lets. Stamp duty is being raised on second homes, double council tax and registration for holiday lets. The NHS, big thing in Cornwall, 5 million more appointments. Neighbourhood health prioritised. Services moved out of urban cities into rural areas, and community health workers going door to door. We're fixing our broken sewage system, and we now have that minimum wage. In energy, rural energy, in Cornwall, that infrastructure will be a boon, not a bind. Critical minerals, the strategy for that, and sustainable mining will fuel our economy and give us energy security, alongside with tidal, geothermal and wind energy, which will power and support our rural way of life. I will.
Much. Within my constituency of Caerfyrddin, we have a number of infrastructure projects being planned to produce and transport energy. And whilst at Plaid Cymru we agree that green energy production is necessary, the transition has to be made with community consent. Undergrounding of cables is project and time specific, depending on thermal rate values and cable type. So does my honourable friend agree that communities need to have a much greater voice in the cumulative effect of these projects?
I thank my honourable member. I do agree that communities must have a say, but they must also benefit. And that is one of the things that this government will be introducing. Another type of security than energy is food security. After a very difficult decade under the Conservatives, Brexit caused real problems at the border, which our SPS and EU agreement will hopefully untangle to a certain extent by 2027, plus those terrible trade deals with Australia and New Zealand, which will allow an influx of beef in, while very little will be going the other way. It's been a time of flux for farmers since Brexit. That rocky introduction of elms, which was then spent very quickly under this government and is coming back, a new improved sustainable farming incentive in April, will hopefully give that support to food production as part of that environmental stewardship. Working with recommendations from Minette Batters, the government can now focus on farm profitability, which is so vital, and move on through the strategies that are due this year to a vision for farming in this country, that land use framework and the farming strategies roadmap, and we will get there.
Sir Alex Shelbrooke.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I think we just have to get down to some basic facts today, because for all of the propositions that are put across by the government, the reality is that people are feeling on the ground. And my constituency crosses two counties of West Yorkshire and North Yorkshire. But in North Yorkshire, Conservative run, they've seen millions of pounds of reductions in grant, as my right honourable friend for Skipton and Ripon touched on. Reduction in the services grant has knocked £14 million off the budget, and the fair funding grant has knocked £20 million off the budget. And the reality is that people start to wonder, does the government understand rural communities at all and rural counties? Because within North Yorkshire there are huge areas of deprivation, but they have now seen their money cut because of the overall picture of the county knocks them out of the picture. But also, Madam Deputy Speaker, a county like North Yorkshire can be very sparsely populated and has unique challenges that need that funding in place. And this is against the backdrop of the attacks that have happened on farming. 92% of my constituency is rural or rural related agricultural business. My own constituency supplies £2.2 billion to the Exchequer, to GDP, out of agriculture. And there has been huge concern and widespread disbelief at the policies that the government has brought in. And even with the U-turns they've knocked out just before Christmas, still has left a huge uncertainty and, crucially, even with those U-turns, a lack of faith in having to invest in the future. And it's not just about farms, there's the whole ecosystem of rural economies. And I have been to businesses in my constituency who hire plant machinery, but they don't just hire it, Madam Deputy Speaker, to the farmers during harvest and areas to do there. They also help make sure that the countryside and the landscapes itself are managed. And North Yorkshire and parts of my own, parts of where I live in the part of West Yorkshire has huge historic areas. These are areas that people come and visit, are tourists, and if that countryside is not maintained, then it becomes less and less income of people coming there. There's been this huge attack in every single angle to people trying to make a living in these rural communities, which they have done for decades and centuries. And nobody... I will give way.
My right honourable friend makes a really important point here. Whether you're in rural North Yorkshire or whether you're on the edge of the West Midlands, where we have some fantastic rural landscape, the fact of the matter is, surely, we have a Labour government that really does not understand the countryside and the countryside way of life, and they're more intent on covering it in concrete.
My honourable friend makes a very important point, and I think that is the view that comes from a lot of people that you speak to in and around rural constituencies, that they say either the government doesn't understand these communities or worse, they don't care. And that seems to be this constant attitude of, you don't need the money, we're going to take it into the urban areas. And that is what people feel. And it's all very well, as we saw at Prime Minister's question, when the Prime Minister's trying to say, well, we've got this bit of the economy, that bit of the economy. Let me tell you, Madam Deputy Speaker, when people are sat at home, it does not feel like that. It does not feel like that when the weather is freezing cold and they're wondering where they're going to make the cuts to ensure that they can heat their homes. And that happens in areas of deprivation in and around my own constituency, which is deemed to be affluent, but because of that, they don't get the money that people need. And I just want to briefly touch on the fact that farms, good agricultural land, is being taken over by solar farms. I am fed up to the back teeth of listening to government ministers say we must no longer be reliant on petrochemical dictators to control our energy. China is a dictatorship and it controls 90% of the processed materials for renewable energy. And I will have a huge amount of respect for the minister if she can, in her summing up, stand up and admit that the dictatorship of China is no better than some of the dictatorships of petrochemical states. And you're just transferring, Madam Deputy Speaker, the problem from one region to another, but they should not pretend that they're any different.
Jodie Gosling.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I would like to welcome the changes, first of all, to inheritance tax, to APR and to BPR. Farming is essential to our rural economies, and I will continue to work with colleagues and with new investment to champion food security, sustainability and the key challenges around the sector which have been a result of serious decline over the past decade. I would like to thank ministers for their time to discuss these important issues and for listening to the views of myself and my constituents. As an MP of a semi-rural area, I am very aware of the challenges faced by living in a rural community. Connectivity, access to work, services and education. I'm aware of the impact that the cuts to bus services, to outreach services like Sure Start had on my community and our ability to thrive. And there are further cuts proposed now by Warwickshire County Council's Reform Council to our school transport, potentially making children walk down unlit, unrestricted roads on their way home from school for a proposed 5 miles, which is just simply dangerous. But I particularly want to focus on crime, and that's why I'm proud to see a cross-departmental approach to addressing rural crime and ensuring that the government's Safer Streets mission benefits every member of our community. Local farmers have repeatedly raised concerns about the level of rural crime with me, so I'm particularly keen to see that over £12.7 million of stolen machinery was recovered last year, including £800,000 from abroad. Theft of machinery is not only is not the only criminality that faces our farmers. One of my local farmers reported the day that a number of dogs from the local hunt broke the pack and ended up on his land filled with sheep. Although none of the ewes were killed, 2 of them later aborted, losing 2 rare breed lambs, thousands of pounds of losses to stock and vets fees, before even considering the emotional damage. This farmer's story is not isolated, and across Nuneaton, residents across Nuneaton regularly contact me concerned about the activities of our local hunts. Missing pets, damage to gardens. There are many serious questions still over Warwickshire Police's handling of the offences, and the force was forced to release details of the secret protocol signed in 2022. In spite of subsequent reviews, this deal, residents tell me, seem to have only emboldened Warwickshire Hunt. Of the 5,000 reports of criminal activities, only 75 prosecutions against 58 individuals have ever been successful in the years between 2004 and 2024.
Will she give way?
I will give way.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. When it comes to rural crime, earlier this week, the Devon and Cornwall Police and Crime Commissioner resigned from the Conservative Party and is standing as an independent for the rest of her term. Would you agree that this is symptomatic of the Conservatives' attitude to rural crime?
I absolutely agree with my honourable friend, and it is symptomatic of just a disregard and a whitewashing of issues in my communities. Rural communities agree that this government's aims to make farming more profitable, to reduce rural crime and to tackle the barriers to them prospering and thriving. If we are to achieve these, we need to continue listening hard to our farming communities, embedded MPs and communications to make sure that their views are heard, to make sure that Safer Streets mission and to take firm action to once and for all stop hunting and axe from impunity.
Joy Morrison.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. When will this Labour government's attack on the countryside come to an end? Will it be when there are no village pubs left to tax anymore? Will it be when the last family farm has shut the barn doors? Will it be when they have banned all English country sports and tradition? Will it be when their left-wing lobby groups have finally had their student union fantasies fulfilled? Will it be when the English countryside is filled with solar farms and onshore wind? For months, they have put family farmers under intolerable stress over the tax proposals that everyone could see they had got wrong. There is not a country pub in my constituency in Beaconsfield, Marlow, and the South Bucks villages that isn't collapsing under the weight of their national insurance tax raid and business rate tax hikes. Yes, I'll give way.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. Across South Shropshire, we're going to see pub after pub close with this rate revaluation. Does she agree with me? Unless the government look at the rate revaluation, there'll be next to no pubs left.
Thank you. Makes a wonderful point that they are not just destroying the place where people go, but the pubs are the place in the village where everyone comes together. They are destroying the local community with no regard to saving something that we saved during COVID, that we kept alive this entire time, only to die a death for, I'm not sure, ideological reasons. It's hard to say. They've gone for the economic livelihoods of our rural communities. Now they are coming for the traditions and character of those same communities. I'm a passionate animal lover. I care deeply about animals and animal welfare standards. So I can say with total certainty the proposed ban on trail hunting is not about animals or their welfare. It is about petty, vindictive ideology and this government's pathological dislike of rural communities.
Hear, hear.
Now, we find in this Parliament in the absurd position of being asked to ban something that doesn't even involve hunting or killing animals. And they've just had a debate in Ireland where they voted against a ban on hunting after a sensible debate. But no, here we have to come to the real question. the unanswered question of animal welfare. What exactly do the government think is going to happen to the 170 packs of hounds in England when they are no longer in use? The 20,000 hounds and numerous horses if the trail hunting ban goes through. Let's be brutally honest, many of them will be destroyed. Yep. If you have a hound, have you ever tried to have it domesticated? Have you tried to have a harrier? No, please. I insist on you trying to have a hound come to your home and stay with you for a week. It is impossible. But it's okay. Put the blood of those hounds and those horses on your heads because you want to stand in ideological purity. I'm sorry.
An awful lot of you. I hope those comments aren't addressed at me.
It's a very important topic, and I'm so sorry that I was carried away. I do feel they don't really care about animal welfare. They don't care because they want to double down on attacking the English rural way of life. English rural traditions going back centuries sacrificed on the altar of left-wing student political ideology. Rural economies and livelihoods ruined. And I say to this government, you will fail in your attempt to destroy the English countryside and our rural communities. They will outlast you, and they will recover from the damage you do to them. But they will never forgive you.
Anna Gelder.
Madam Deputy Speaker, and it's a real pleasure to speak in this debate on behalf of the towns, farms and coastal villages of South East Cornwall. Our rolling hills and dramatic coastline attract visitors across the country, but they also support our livelihoods, our daily lives and the well-being of local residents. A local economy that works for local people year-round means protecting our natural environment, which is vital to our key tourism sector. It means supporting new industries such as critical minerals via the new Cannock Industrial Growth Fund and providing a voice for traditional industries. As a keen wild swimmer, I care deeply about our Cornish rivers and beaches. So last year, I challenged the former CEO of South West Water on their actions. And I look forward to seeing stronger accountability and better outcomes for local residents as a result of the new water measures put forward by this government. Poor connectivity has held back rural communities for far too long, and I welcome the work in this area. So can I ask the Minister to outline what steps are being taken to tackle rural internet deserts, which I experience frequently in my village? Transport remains also a major challenge for rural life, and in South East Cornwall, residents often travel long distances just to reach essential services, work or for education. Rural communities value our space and our close-knit society, but no one should feel cut off or face extra financial barriers simply because of where they live. So I welcome the £20 million allocated by the government to Cornwall to improve our bus services, and I'm determined to ensure local people feel the benefit of that investment. Under the last government, rail fares from Liskeard to Paddington rose by 65%, placing yet another burden on rural households. We have put an end to this increase. Healthcare access has been another real problem for my residents, and many residents travel long distances for care, often crossing the Tamar and paying a toll, only to face staff shortages, stretched services and long waits. Labour is already bringing down those waiting lists, but rural access requires specific attention. So would the Minister set out how the government is working to ensure that geography never becomes a barrier to care? Rural communities remember who stands up for them and who delivers the essential services that they need. And in rural areas, we've seen the legacy left by the Conservatives. Their mismanagement fed directly into stagnant growth and broken public services, with rural areas paying the price through long hospital waiting times, crumbling school buildings and a public transport network that simply did not work. So, alongside other Cornish Labour MPs, we've made sure that Cornish rural voices are heard here in Westminster, and I've spent time directly speaking with farmers and industry experts, listening to their concerns and building the case for change. And I'm pleased to see the increase in the agriculture and business property relief thresholds. Farmers work tirelessly to produce food for our tables, yet their fields are too often used as dumping grounds for waste. So I asked the Minister to outline what further action is underway to tackle waste crimes that blight our rural community, and I will give way.
So the Honourable Lady's out of time now. Cameron Thomas.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Ahead of the election in Tewkesbury, considering my defence background, I recognised that I didn't fully enough understand the experiences nor the lifestyles which come with rurality. So I began reaching out. I made visits. I spoke with people, I listened to them, and I heard them. I think that if you want to represent people, or if you're likely to make decisions which will directly impact people, then you should first exercise due diligence. I'm not convinced that this government fully understood farmers, publicans or hoteliers prior to announcing its economic plans for the country, although if the Conservative Party does understand rurality, then its legacy is every bit as damning. Following over a year of consistent lobbying, the government recently made some, to be fair, pretty significant concessions to farmers, and I credit Gloucestershire NFU and my local farmers, including Charles Day, for the part that they played. Gloucestershire publicans and hoteliers still reeling from the 2024 autumn budget feel no better off following the last. I wouldn't suggest that banning Labour MPs from your pubs is the right way to go about that, so I will make a suggestion shortly. My publicans don't have tractors that they can drive through Parliament Square. So to better understand the experience of Tewkesbury's hospitality sector, I would welcome a government minister to join me for lunch in any one of my 52 pubs. I guarantee they'll be made to feel most welcome. To date, when I've raised the pressures on hospitality with ministers and with the Chancellor herself, I've not felt listened to. When challenging some of Labour's most damaging taxes, such as the hike in employers' national insurance contributions or unsustainable business rates, my Liberal Democrat colleagues and I are frequently challenged to offer financial alternatives to Labour's most damaging taxes, which we do. For one, we could undo an awful lot of this by joining a customs union with the EU. And along with consistent pressure from my colleagues, I've personally called in this very chamber for increases in the digital services tax to raise money from some of the most profitable businesses in this country, rather than from the most desperate. Thank you.
Apologies. Dave Robertson.
Mr. Speaker, you would be forgiven for reading the motion put forward by the opposition today for thinking that all was rosy in the countryside before the election in 2024. But in Lichfield, Burntwood and the Villages, a countryside seat which is 85% rural, people know that that was not the case. They know just how important it is that government takes the concerns of rural communities seriously. They also know that despite more than 3 decades of representation by a Conservative MP, successive Conservative governments have treated them with disdain. And there is perhaps no better example of that disdain that the party opposite showed to communities like mine than the story of HS2. Conservative ministers asleep at the wheel while HS2 Limited treated landowners in areas like mine like they were a completely and utterly ignorable sideshow. It's gone on for decades. I've spoken to farmers in my patch who have been dealing with HS2 for 17 years and have still not had final amounts of payments paid to them. Delay after delay, disruption after disruption. It is an absolute disgrace. Years of roadworks causing massive inconvenience, farmers not being able to farm on their land despite it not being built on, and business planning put on hold for years. The party opposite say they care about our agricultural communities, but what did they do when our farmers who suffered under that project? Things got so bad at HS2 under the Tories that this government has had to bring in a new chair and a new CEO to clean up the mess that was left. In fact, Mark Wilde, the new chief executive, has experience cleaning up Conservative messes. We only have to look at Crossrail. Beyond that, we also have further transport issues in my constituency that really affect farmers in my patch and rural constituents. Chetwynd Bridge is a fantastic example. It's a bridge that crosses from my patch into the Honourable Member for South Derbyshire's. It is the largest wrought iron bridge left in the country. It is Grade 2 listed. It is a wonderful piece of architecture. It's incredibly useful and it's very pretty. Unfortunately, Britain's largest surviving cast iron bridge has been neglected for decades. Deterioration in the structure was first spotted in the 70s, but Staffordshire County Council do not have a plan on how to fix it. They know that it will cost £27 million. They do not know how to fund it. They did not speak to me before the spending review and in fact waited until Reform UK were in control of the council to get in touch, after which spending review decisions have been made. Now, I'm working hard to try and find that £27 million to replace that bridge, and I'll be meeting with the relevant minister next week. Now, these are real-world examples of where
Conservative MPs and Conservative governments and Conservative councils did not do the work. They didn't do the work. They said all of the right things. They were quite happy to go out there and dance and make their statements, but they didn't do the work. They didn't go out there to actually defend communities like mine. And I will take absolutely no lessons from them. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker.
Stuart Anderson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Living in a rural community is a brilliant way of life. It's beautiful, but it comes with remoteness, it comes with different issues. I've lived in an urban area and a rural area, and they are different. There are things that connect them, but a few things that I want to point out today that are really important that I have found in rural communities. Now, I've spoken on hospitality, farming, always going to be up there, and they're struggling and facing issues at the moment. But the shotgun licensing, the consultation that is coming up, and I know my honourable friend from North Cotswolds has just spoken eloquently on this, but it is going to have a serious impact to shotgun holders that require the use of a shotgun, not just for their job, but also for pastimes. And if a third of shotgun users do not renew this, it costs over £1 billion to the UK economy. And I have one of the most, the constituencies with one of the most shotgun licences. I'd really like the Minister to take this seriously. There is a huge knock-on impact on changing any licensing rules for shotguns. The other area I want to touch on, and a few people have spoken about already, is trail hunting. So with the proposed ban of trail hunting, it will have a big impact on rural communities. And I get that everybody doesn't think the same way as me. I grew up hunting, shooting, fishing. I've never been on a horse in my life. The communities around trail hunting are great. What they do supporting the local areas, they are some great people. I have just launched my survey. My survey for my constituents, almost 2,000 people have filled this in. And 63% of South Shropshire constituents want this to continue. It's a rural way of life that gives 78 to £100 million back into the rural economy.
Honourable friend of mine.
Yes, I will.
My honourable friend, though, share my concern that such a controversial piece of legislation is being wrapped up with other things that people would find hard to disagree with, such as puppy farming, etc. And that this is just a cheap trick by the government to try and say you voted against puppy farming rather than focusing on that particular issue.
My honourable friend raises a brilliant point. There are so many good things that can be done on animal welfare, but this is not one of them. And if we look at the facts to support trail hunting, let's have a look at the incidents over the year. So when you look at how many people have been charged from 2004 to 2023, there were 44 convictions by hunts for trail hunting, and there have been 250,000 organised hunt days since that time. So that's one conviction for every 5,680 trail hunting days. So if you had one hunt a day, you would have to take 15 years to get a conviction. That is a serious statistic. Because the government do not like trail hunting, and they do not like the people that carry out trail hunting, they want to ban it. On those statistics, there is not one thing they would ban. There is nothing that they would ban on those stats. They do not support a widespread criminality on trail hunting. There is no evidence of that at all. And I stand clear, if anybody breaks the law, they should be prosecuted. They should do that. But there's a huge impact to farriers, people around, for vets, fallen stock. Can the Minister let me know who is going to pick up the bill for fallen stock? That's a massive impact that will fall on farmers. Trail hunting is supported in South Shropshire, and I get that some constituents won't support that. That's fine. If anybody wants to look at what people are doing their animal welfare, go on my Facebook page and my post about it this morning. What people are saying in defending animal welfare is absolutely brutal, and I don't support that. Trail hunting is a key part of South Shropshire. I will stand up for it and for shotgun licence holders, and it should continue. These rural pursuits are part of my community.
Jenny Riddle-Carpenter.
Madam. I'm delighted to be the first ever Labour MP for Suffolk Coastal. But actually, perhaps even more so, I'm delighted to be the first ever MP that's born and raised in my constituency, an incredibly rural constituency. We've had many other members here in this House that were helicoptered in from cities to represent Suffolk Coastal. So I can truly stand here in this place, in this House, and say it has, for the first time, a constituency MP that was born, bred and raised. Yeah. And now, when I stand here and say that, I can also say that in looking back in 2004, when I was 17, Madam Deputy Speaker, the fox hunting debate was playing out. And it's been incredibly interesting to hear so many people, so many members on the other side, talk about rural Labour MPs not understanding rural issues and not understanding the fox hunting debate. And I can tell you, Madam Deputy Speaker, that one of the very reasons I'm even a Labour member, let alone a Labour MP, is because of fox hunting and the ban on fox hunting. And how furious I was at 17 that members opposite, the party opposite, was so furious about fox hunting, and it did not care to prioritise child poverty, lifting children out of poverty. And I could not comprehend a world at that point, and that's what drove me to being Labour. Those were my very values in growing up in a rural area, now representing a rural seat, that I'm incredibly proud to stand here and say, well, I will continue to stand on that ticket and defend our Labour manifesto. Now, there are issues that we need to separate around conservation and shooting, and those are very separate issues to hunting in the realm. And I will continue to have those conversations with this Labour government. I can also say that some of the, well, all of the elements that were put forward in the motion were beyond ridiculous. And in particular, the point about net zero targets and energy infrastructure. Madam Deputy Speaker, Suffolk Coastal is set to be hosting, approval goes ahead for it, Sea-Link, Line-Link, we've just had Sizewell C approved. We've got so many other schemes that were approved or brought forward, not only under a Conservative government, but under a Conservative-led county council. So my constituency, there are many issues with energy infrastructure that are real and need to be talked about. Many, many issues. But those issues are about coordination, cumulative impact, and has never been any serious...
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Does my honourable friend agree that in places like Suffolk and indeed Norfolk next door, there are hundreds and hundreds of jobs, good, well-paying, green jobs tied up in the renewable energy sector, and the rhetoric from the Conservative government, and particularly from the Conservative opposition and Reform, put at risk those vital jobs in our constituencies?
I couldn't agree more, Madam Deputy Speaker, with my honourable friend's comments there. I think it's really dangerous, some of the things that we hear from the party opposite. But when we're going to have sensible conversations about our renewable energy infrastructure, it needs to be focused on coordination. In my constituency, I have about 7 NSIPs, all within a 10-mile radius, and there has never been any attempt to coordinate them, which is why I brought forward an amendment to the Planning and Infrastructure Bill to seek to make it a legal duty to require those NSIPs to be coordinated, where they're being built out at the same time in a small geography. It's crazy to me that that has never been looked at seriously, and I will continue to urge the government and work with the government to see how we can bring that forward. I'd be very keen to see an energy infrastructure levy in order to seek that coordination. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, in closing my remarks, I would just like to continue to urge the government to go further on farming profitability. I was delighted to see the changes to the thresholds that so many of my backbench colleagues and I worked hard to secure. There is more to do, and the Baroness Batter's review addresses some of the most key issues that I know the government is looking at and taking seriously, and I'm delighted with many of those recommendations, and I'm delighted with the conversations I've had about that. The government has my commitment to make sure that we continue that work and have those conversations, and I'm delighted to support the government in that.
Given the time, I just want to read into the record, if I may, some key suggestions for the government on this important issue, and I welcome the fact that we've tabled a debate on our rural communities. It's interesting, I'll just say in passing, that we're told in recent media over the last few days that Reform UK is the party of the farmer. Oh, there they are, out tilling the fields. Yes, as always, all noise, no delivery. I want to echo the call that many have made to reduce business rates through the revaluation and VAT on our vital rural hubs. Go on then.
So does the honourable gentleman agree with me
and over 4,000 business owners, including hundreds of rural companies, who signed my open letter to the Chancellor in the last 24 hours, stating that a root and branch review of business rates is now a matter of urgency if bankruptcy and misery is to be avoided. There should be no change to the interim COVID relief subsidies until that review is complete. Do you agree with that?
I agree, but I think our front bench goes one step further, which just says get rid of the whole damn thing in the first instance, and that solves the problem at a stroke. What I would urge the government is, and they did this slightly with regards to the family farm tax, there seem to be noises off from the Treasury, from the Business Department and others about, well, potential changes here, there and everywhere, and that they are listening. Businesses are now at the brink. They need clear certainty now. Stop playing cat and mouse with rural businesses on these policies. Take a decision, announce it. If it's a screeching U-turn, perform it. Do it elegantly. But for the love of God, just do it. I won't, if he'll forgive me. The second point I want to say is please restore the listed places of worship scheme. Really vital for our rural churches. I echo the point which has been made. I declare an interest as a holder of one. It is daft to merge sections 1 and 2 with regards to shotgun licences. A very serious issue, as we know, happened in Devon a few years ago. This is a draconian response to that. There are other ways to deal with shotgun licence safely. Drop the family farm tax. It was the wrong policy. It had been suggested by officials to Conservative Treasury ministers every budget cycle. And Treasury ministers from the Conservative side said no. It was never going to raise that amount of money, so the government told us before the changes. It's now going to raise even less because of the changes to the threshold. Pull the plaster off that one and again do it quickly. It is not worth the pain, I say to the Treasury bench, to continue to torture family farms. Small family farms in North Dorset is the vale of the small dairies, to quote Thomas Hardy. Lots of family farms, and they will go to the wall even with the changes to the threshold which the government has announced. Everybody with a dairy sector, Madam Deputy Speaker, will be aware of the unsustainable fluctuations in milk price. We need to see a government-led dairy strategy in order to secure what is a vital part of our agricultural sector. We need, I would suggest, in regards to planning, to restore funding for neighbourhood plans, because that will deliver the local vernacular housing which local communities wish to see. And my final point is that we need a fundamental ruralisation of the formula that underpin important funding decisions, whether that's for schools, whether that's for police, whether it's for Environment Agency projects. Get all of that right, and the government might begin to restore its reputation within the rural community. Continue as they are, and they're on a hiding to nothing.
Mike Reader.
Very much. Madam Deputy Speaker, I wanted to come and contribute to this debate to celebrate the brilliant food producers in Northamptonshire and across the UK, some of which you sampled, Madam Deputy Speaker, at Northamptonshire Day. And as Chair of the Food and Drink APPG, I've seen firsthand how rural communities play a critical part in our supply chain and how they set the standard for global food quality. So preparing for today, I did think I might do like men in the opposition, go buy myself a fresh Barber jacket, some shiny wellies, film a social media video ranting about protecting farmers completely tone deaf from the 14 years of hammering they got under the Conservative government. But no, I'm going to be collegiate, Madam Deputy Speaker, and instead I'm going to focus on supporting food producers and particularly on how we support growth and prosperity in rural communities. Many will know that my background lies in the construction sector. I'm a proud Yimby and a supporter of this Labour government's necessary policies to correct the catastrophic and sustained failures of the last government to build, baby, build. And whilst many in the opposition benches see development as a threat to communities, if they spent more than 5 minutes talking to farmers and rural landowners, they'd know that actually it's really important that we support sustainable development and it's critical to the prosperity of rural Britain. Of course I will.
Madam Speaker, first of all, can I commend the Honourable Gentleman. One of the things that concerns me is putting forward the good points for agriculture and how the economy can build off it. Northern Ireland has £6 billion worth of manufacturing and export, and it's critical for Northern Ireland to do well as well. But one of the whole things that holds us back is the veterinary medicines, the Northern Ireland Protocol. So to see us go forward with the rest of the United Kingdom, does they agree that the Northern Ireland Protocol should be addressed? And perhaps the Minister, whenever she comes back, perhaps they can give us some ideas on that.
Thank you for the intervention. I'm not familiar with the Northern Ireland Protocol at all, but as I learn more about the SPS agreement in my role as the Chair, we've got Nick Thomas-Simmons, I hope, coming to see us very soon to explain. Oh, sorry, Madam.
The honourable gentleman knows better than that. He can refer to him as the Minister.
Sorry, Madam Deputy Speaker. Anyway, so the farming productivity review, is very clear. If we want a sustainable rural economy, there's much more we can do to unlock its potential. And currently, planning is one of those areas that we can look to tackle. A farmer can spend millions of hours filling in mountains of paperwork to build new sheds, slurry pits or new barns to support better welfare, and our planning system does not support our farmers, the livestock that they keep, or the British public who love what they buy from their supermarkets, butchers and cafes. As set out in the paper Yes in My Farmyard, which I delivered with the YIMBY initiative and with support from the Honourable Member for Glastonbury and Somerton, we've identified some clear recommendations as to how the government can help reduce paperwork and speed up rural development. I'd like to just share a few. So through the permitted development regime, this Labour government can put down instruments to improve Part 6 of the regime by abolishing height and volume restrictions on land and machinery improvements. We can also change and expand Class R regulations to improve anaerobic digestion and storage for digesters, which will help enhance the circular economy for fertilisers, reduce our reliance on Russia and other states where we get our fertilisers from, and lower river pollution. And we can expand Class Q regulations to natural landscapes to ensure that our farmers can build small, sensible, sustainable settlements for their agricultural workers, who in turn can protect these precious environments. They're all practical steps which will help rural businesses diversify and bring long-term stability to rural economies. I'm really pleased to see that many of the recommendations in our paper are broadly supported in the Batters Review into farming profitability, and it has endorsed that some of these policies are in the paper, but I now encourage the DEFRA ministers to work with MHCLG to bring forward these planning changes and let our YIMBY farming communities, or should that be YIMFI farming communities, say yes in my farmyard.
Joe Robertson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's a pleasure to be speaking in this debate on supporting rural communities. Although to the casual observer who may have been here at the beginning hearing the Minister open, it appeared we were in a debate about general ramblings on COVID, or later on, if they were here when they heard the Honourable Member for South West Norfolk, they might have felt that they're in a general debate on the NHS. But I understand it, Madam Deputy Speaker. I understand why members opposite do not want to talk about rural communities, because despite their protestations, they know that they have lost the trust of rural Britain. And it's little wonder. From the family farm tax, what could be more damaging? And it's taken them over a year from that first budget when they introduced that tax to finally U-turn on the majority of it. But before that point, 4 times they voted against Conservative proposals to scrap the tax. On 4 occasions, they had the opportunity to say enough is enough. And we will continue to campaign on scrapping the family farm tax in its entirety until it is gone completely. But for rural and coastal communities like mine on the Isle of Wight, it's not just farmers who have the worst possible deal from this government. It's the fishing communities too. In my constituency, just 2 decades ago, there were 30 fully crewed fishing boats. There are now 3. And this government rubbed the fishing community's face in it when they renegotiated with the EU and folded and gave away our fishing rights for 12 years. And, Madam Deputy Speaker, for those who are reading this in Hansard in the future, from the benches opposite there seem to be smirks, expressions of laughter and jeering. This is a party, a government, who fundamentally misunderstands the damage it's doing to rural Britain. The Conservative Party have always been and always will be the party of rural Britain. I will give way.
Will my honourable friend agree with me that one of the greatest damages that they're doing to the countryside is destroying it with acres upon acres, thousands of acres upon thousands of acres of solar farms, destroying our best and most versatile farmland?
I wholeheartedly agree with my honourable friend, and I thank her for raising it. And to add to that, destroying many rural areas with a clamour for house building in the wrong places. We should all agree, we can all agree, we need more houses for future generations. The argument is where you build them. And I'm surprised to hear members opposite say that they speak to farming communities and rural communities who are, yes, in my backyard, they want building. People do not want building of the wrong type of houses for people who do not live in their area and have no desire to live in their area. Most services are available in cities. That is where the majority of building should be taking place. And this government should be looking again at the whole way in which house building and planning works in this country. And until it understands the damage it's doing to rural Britain, it will continue to hemorrhage votes.
It's Nate.
And I refer members to my register of interests. Too often, rural Britain has been spoken about and taken for granted, and no more so than by the party opposite, which over 14 years, and including through its harmful pursuit of Brexit, left many rural businesses, including family farms like my own, operating on life support. Now, as the Food and Drink Federation's 2024 Trade Snapshot notes, and I quote, the UK's global food export volumes have declined significantly more than other major European countries, demonstrating that the UK's challenges aren't part of a global trend, but rather unique to the UK's post-Brexit circumstances. And this is why I welcome the work that this government is doing towards an SPS agreement that will help food and drink producers in my constituency of Rushcliffe. Now, doing things differently is extremely important, Madam Deputy Speaker. In government, we must think, talk about and act differently in relation to rural Britain in order to break long-standing cycles of poverty and underinvestment. Rural Britain cannot be treated as an afterthought, not only because this risks the urban-rural divide growing even further, but because rural Britain is central to everything that we do. Yes, food security, nature restoration, flooding adaptation and animal welfare all clearly depend on partnership with rural communities. Everyone here knows that. But the role of rural Britain goes much further still. Why? Because new homes, new energy infrastructure, new transport routes, new critical mineral extraction, national security planning and preparation, they will all depend on rural space and resources. And this is why, in my view, and in the view of many of my colleagues on these benches, rural Britain offers a vital route, arguably the only route, to national renewal. But this will only happen if its unique values, needs and potential are properly understood and acted upon. And that is why, setting aside this opposition motion, which simply lists a set of things which previously the Conservative government didn't necessarily resolve, I want to focus on the phrase in the amendment which talks about a joined-up approach. And I will continue to push the government to commit to developing a proper rural strategy. The last one was in 2004 under the last Labour government. And I hope that we will commit to a rural strategy which puts rural Britain at the centre of economic growth, which means that we can finally ditch overused slogans about NIMBYs, YIMBYs and stop trivialising our rural communities, which are so important.
The honourable gentleman is out of time. Harriet Cross.
Madam Deputy Speaker, and I'm really grateful to have been called today. And on any other week, I would focus on more substantive
day-to-day, week-to-week rural matters, whether that's the family farm tax. I am grateful that there has been this partial U-turn. It shouldn't have taken this long. It shouldn't have taken the pain and frustration and hurt that it caused our farming and rural communities. It must go further. We must get a full U-turn. We have to protect our rural communities. There's a reason why over 6,200 farming, agricultural and forestry businesses have closed since this government's come to power. It's not just farms impacted by the family farm tax. It's our rural communities as a whole, the suppliers, the contractors. They're all important. They're all part of our rural matrix, and they're all being let down by the family farm tax. But given it's this week, and given the events in North East Scotland and Aberdeenshire in particular with the snow, I want to focus on what's happening there and the support for our rural communities. Aberdeenshire is the 4th lowest funded council in Scotland and the lowest funded rural council. Because of that, Aberdeenshire Council has had awful decisions in recent years on the provision of services. Many of these focused on our roads, on gritting and the provisions for winter preparedness. And we are seeing the results of that at the moment. Aberdeenshire is under a few feet of snow, not a dusting, a few feet. Our farmers are literally walking through waist-deep snow to dig their sheep, their livestock out of snowdrifts. They're then getting in their tractors to clear the roads for communities. They're bringing people who are stuck and needing medical attention in their cabs to the main roads to try and get them to hospitals. Our rural communities pull together when they're in times of need, when there is time to take action. They have done that for years, they will keep doing that, and they deserve our support. But support is not enough. We must make sure that rural communities are properly funded, properly supported, and able to act and prepare for situations like this. And I will end briefly with just a thank you generally to everyone in Aberdeenshire in the last week who has lent a hand, whether that's, as I've said, the farmers, whether that's the council workers, organisations and volunteers like COTAG who have been amazing in getting people out of tough situations, volunteers, neighbours or just passers-by who have pushed cars, dug roads, children who we've seen digging out driveways of their neighbours. It's been a massive effort in Aberdeenshire. It will continue. The next issue is ice. We're getting freezing temperatures, and once the snow, the masses of snow starts to melt, ice and flooding will be the next issue. We must be prepared. We need assistance and funding to make sure that when this happens again, which it will, Aberdeenshire and other rural counties can be properly prepared. Thank you.
Mr. Robbie Moore.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And it has been clear that this government has been a disaster for rural communities. And we've heard loud and clear from many excellent contributions on this side of the House that have highlighted the deep concerns faced by many of our constituents. The Right Honourable Member for Skipton Ripon highlighted the challenges of the family farm tax on pubs, on funding rural councils like North Yorkshire. The Honourable Member for the North Cotswolds highlighted the funding challenges that are being faced right now with Gloucestershire County Council, and the implications on the changes of shotgun licences will be disastrous for our shooting community. The Honourable Member for Bridlington and the Wolds, who is a doughty campaigner for our rural community, highlighted the challenges associated with the pig industry, the shooting industry, and the challenges with the family farm tax. And the Right Honourable Member for North East Cambridgeshire, who I was proud to serve as a minister in DEFRA before the general election, highlighted the challenge again of the family farm tax on his constituents, the fact that this government has cut productivity grants, the implications of the Baroness Batter's review, and the fact that the government has not even announced yet what it's going to be doing with the 57 recommendations. The Honourable Member for Wetherby and Easingwold also highlighted the implications on many of those rural local authorities, like the cut on the Rural Service Delivery Grant, and again highlighted the impacts of the family farm tax and the family business tax on the wider supply chain that is impacting many of those family businesses supporting our families. And I will give way to the Honourable Member.
Is he aghast as I am to hear Labour backbenchers on the benches opposite taking credit for substantial U-turns to the family farm tax as though it was inevitable? It was them that introduced it.
agree with the honourable member, and I will come on to that because that is ridiculous. And we've heard from the honourable member for Beaconsfield, for South Shropshire, for North Dorset, who made the absolute critical point that this government should stop playing cat and mouse with our rural businesses. And the honourable member for the Isle of Wight East referenced the fact that trust has been lost with rural Britain and our rural fishing communities as a result of this government's choices. And quite rightly, the honourable member for Gordon and Buchan highlighted the challenges that are being faced right now as a result of the bad weather facing her constituency and the north of Scotland, and the fact that it is our farmers that are doing the hard work to support our rural communities. Madam Deputy Speaker, we have heard throughout this debate the immense pressure our entire hospitality sector is being put under. And I heard this from my own constituents, Michael, Kath and Jodie, at the Dog and Gun pub in the Worth Valley just before Christmas. We now know that since the autumn budget alone, over 1,100 pubs and restaurants have closed and more than 89,000 hospitality workers have lost their jobs. The rise in employers' national insurance, the minimum wage, the unemployment rights bill, these measures are making doing business near impossible. And in this process, the government are robbing many of those young people their first job opportunities and tearing the heart out of our rural economies. That's all in addition to the skyrocketing business rates foisted on our many pubs by this government. Many pubs are looking at increases in their valuation rates of 30%, a staggering amount that they simply will not be able to afford. The Conservatives will scrap business rates in full. Why on earth won't the Labour government do it? Madam Deputy Speaker, is it any wonder that up and down the country, Labour MPs are finding it harder and harder to find a pub that will serve them? And if they thought it was bad for pubs, it's just as bad for our farmers. Just look at what rural Britain has been hit by in the last 18 months alone through the choices of this Labour government. De-linked payments dramatically reduced, capital grants closed overnight, the sustainable farming incentive stopped with no warning. And then how embarrassing was it, Madam Deputy Speaker, that ministers were forced to admit that they wrongly refused SFI funding to around 3,000 farmers when they shut the scheme. Pure ignorance and incompetence. Madam Deputy Speaker, the farming budget has also been slashed and now combined and referenced as the farming and nature budget to create the false impression that they actually care and that funding has increased. New taxes on fertilisers, the new double cab pickup tax, plans to reclassify shotgun licences, making it harder, more difficult, more expensive to renew and apply for a licence. Country pursuits and sports, which drives the rural economy, to be banned, and a land use framework threatening to take 18% of our land out of UK food production. A US trade deal that totally destroys the UK bioethanol market, and with it robs 1/6 of the domestic wheat market for our farmers. And Madam Deputy Speaker, I go on. Prime agricultural land being covered in solar panels by the Energy Secretary, regardless of local opinion and food security concerns. And on that point, I will give way.
I'm very grateful to my honourable friend giving way. And does he share my concerns? I mean, I raised this in the Opposition Day debate for the summer, that on top of solar farms taking over agricultural land, no research has been done in thermal runaway and what the evaporation of heavy metal output onto agricultural land would cause.
My right honourable friend makes an excellent point. It feeds into the narrative that this government is not making the sound decisions that our rural economy wants, given the fact that they are industrialising much of our prime agricultural land with heavy metals that will damage the soil nutrients in the future. And closer to home to me, Madam Deputy Speaker, in Keighley, plans to roll out England's biggest wind farm on our protected peatland. A disgrace that the fact that the moratorium on onshore wind has been removed by this Labour government. And the Young Farmers Grant, Madam Deputy Speaker, cancelled for the first time. Our rural councils have been hit hard too, with a £110 million rural service delivery grant, which supported many of our rural communities, axed. Fairer funding for rural councils scrapped, and the transport, the £2 bus cap gone, making it more expensive to get around our rural areas. And then to top it all off, 14 months of anxiety over the disastrous family farm and family business tax. 14 months of families who have worked hard all of their lives, completely terrified about their future. Parents, grandparents of young farmers in tears. And yes, Madam Deputy Speaker, lives have been lost, only for the government to finally admit what was obvious to everyone else from the start. So I must say, to see some Labour MPs treating this as a victory lap is a disgrace, and to see others now coming out of the woodwork to say that actually they supported these changes all along is even worse. Because the reality is, right up until Christmas, Labour ministers were adamant that there would be no changes to APR and BPR. Labour MPs voted against this policy 4 times, and only one MP, Madam Deputy Speaker, on the Labour benches had the backbone to vote against this policy before against the Chancellor. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, time and time again, this Labour government has failed to understand, and worse, ignored rural Britain. As a result, family businesses' confidence is now at a 15-year low. The government's own farmer opinion tracker shows only 1 in 3 farmers in England now feel positive about their future. A third of farmers are planning on scaling back investment because of this government's policies. A record number of farms have closed since Labour came to office, and the government's own profitability review is being rolled out at the slowest of speeds. So can I urge every honourable member who has sought to defend the government's record in this debate today to get real and recognise the dire situation rural Britain is in. This government has chosen to ignore warnings, dismiss experience and gamble with the livelihoods of the people who feed this country and care for this countryside. Farmers and rural communities see exactly what's happening. Our pubs and hospitality sector is struggling. They feel it. They are paying the price for it, and Madam Deputy Speaker, rural communities will not forget who stood with them and who turned their backs.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm grateful to have the opportunity to close this debate, and I have to say, even in the deep, bleak midwinter, I don't recognise the gloomy, barren landscape that members opposite have been describing. They describe a litany of disasters. If only they'd been in government for the last 14 years and been able to do something about them. As I go round our countryside, I see quite a different picture. Millions of people in rural communities who were taken for granted and underserved by the party opposite, and that's why they kicked them out at the last general election. On this side of the House, we are laser-focused on encouraging growth. And it is a Labour government that is now the party of the countryside. They should stop talking the country down and get behind our drive for growth. But let's look at the inheritance that they left with local communities. Broken public services, boarded up post offices, crumbling schools, sky-high NHS waiting list. They have learned no lessons, offered no apologies and showed no contrition, and that's why they were booted out of government. They had a Liz Truss mini-budget that crashed the economy, sending mortgages, rents and bills soaring. And who was the Financial Secretary to the Treasury when food inflation hit 19%? The Shadow DEFRA Secretary. I'm not giving way. I've got 8 minutes to respond to the debate. Their former Prime Minister was explicit about their policy of and saying there's a deliberate policy of taking money away from deprived inner city areas to give to rural areas. This government is cleaning up the mess they made. We've stabilised the economy, and I'm grateful. Well, I'm sorry that the gentleman for Winchester isn't in his place, because I cycled there from the New Forest during the COVID lockdowns, and I did the 25 miles, got to Winchester, but he talked a lot about the 61 bus, but he didn't mention anything about the rail fare freeze that is going to mean that his constituents are going to enjoy freezing of rail fares, as well as the freezing of prescription charges, £150 off energy bills, and the driving up of wages. And what did the Conservatives do in relation to each of those areas that will help people in rural communities? They voted against each and every one of those measures. They left the health service that was on its knees, our schools were crumbling, and they crashed the economy. So we've done more in 18 months than they have achieved in 14 miserable years. Cheaper mortgages, new rights for workers, and lifting 500,000 people out of poverty. And I want to come back to bus routes, because under the Conservatives and Lib Dems, bus routes in England declined by 50% since 2010. 8,000 services slashed on their watch. We have taken immediate action with the Bus Services Act, I will not give way, which includes provision to support socially necessary bus services, so important in rural areas. I'm grateful to have the Bus Minister on my side. And we have maintained the national £3 bus fare cap. We heard from... There was no cap under their government. They're shouting from a sudden. There was no cap. We've heard from the colleague from Sherwood about the problems with rural crime. During the 14 years of Conservative government, the recorded crime rate in rural areas of England and Wales increased by 32%. Our rural communities paid the price for the Tories being asleep on the job and those 20,000 police officers that they and the Liberal Democrats cut in 2010. We are ensuring rural communities will be better protected from the scourge of rural crime, such as equipment theft, livestock theft and hare coursing. We know these devastate communities, farming and wildlife, and that's why we've collaborated with the National Police Chiefs Council and the Home Office to deliver a renewed rural and wildlife crime strategy published in last November. My honourable friend for South East Cornwall asked about waste crime, and I visited my honourable friend's constituency in Lichfield to see the fly tipping that had gone on there. We know that waste crime blights our rural communities and it undermines legitimate businesses. The last government let waste gangs and organised crime groups run riot, with incidents rising by 20% in their last 5 years. And so we have announced what are we going to do. We are announcing we're bringing in. They consulted on changes in 2018. We are bringing them in this year. We are introducing digital waste tracking this year, end-to-end tracking of who is looking after. No, it's actually going to be operational from April this year. So the infrastructure is there. So mandatory digital waste tracking, reforming the permitting system, a system that was so loose that Oscar the dog could be a waste carrier, and tougher background checks for people carrying waste. And we'll require vehicles transporting waste to display their permit numbers. This was all prepped and planned and consulted on by them. The action is happening under this Labour government. Now, we've heard a lot of talk about land use framework. We are going to have to change the way we use land, because our landscapes need to change to support climate change mitigation and adaptation, economic growth, housing delivery, food production, clean energy, and to meet our statutory targets for nature recovery. And that land use framework will be published later this year. We had the Right Honourable Gentleman for Skipton and Ripon talking about informal employment relations. I'm old enough to remember when their government, with the Lib Dems in coalition, abolished the Agricultural Wages Board, abolished the Commission on Rural Communities, and their prime plan for rural prosperity was to sell off the nation's forest, which received uproar in the rural communities and which was the first U-turn of that coalition government. As the Minister for Forests, I have been visiting Hexham, and I stood amongst the pines and the spruce and the furze trees of Kielder Forest, a landscape bursting with growth, renewal and vitality. And I met the men and women who make that possible, and I met some of the businesses places with my friend, the member for Hexham. We went to innovators at Egger in Hexham, one of Northumberland's largest rural employers, turning timber into panels that are found in homes and workplaces across the country. We have announced the first new national forest for more than 30 years in Bristol, Swindon and Gloucester, all around the west of England, and we're not waiting 30 years to announce the next ones. In November last year, we announced the creation of 2 more national forests, the Oxford-Cambridge corridor, and a competition will be launched for a 3rd new national forest in the Midlands or the north of England in early 2026. Tens of millions of new trees planted in the coming years alongside new infrastructure and new homes that this country needs. Now, I want to come on to some of the points raised in the debate. So I was asked about the Batters Review. There were 57 points. The member for Wetherby and for Northampton South, I learnt a new word about YIMFI. Our priority is to get the implementation of this right, and we are considering all of those recommendations, but we will set out a detailed response to the Batters Review in our 25-year farming roadmap. On firearms licensing, the Prevention of Future Deaths report into the fatal shootings in Plymouth said that there were problems in the firearms licensing scheme, and the fees for firearms licensing were last reviewed in 2015. So it is important that the additional revenue from firearms licensing is used to...
Mike Wood.
I beg to move that the question be moved.
The question is that the question be now put. As many as of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. The question is that the original words stand part of the question. As many as of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. Division, clear the lobby. The question is that the original words stand part of the question. As many as of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. No. The tellers for the ayes are Andrew Snowden and Jerome Mayhew. The tellers for the noes, Gregor Poynton and Nezel Caliscan.
Order.
The ayes to the right, 105. The noes to the left, 332.
Thank you. The ayes to the right, 105. The noes to the left, 332. The noes have it, the noes have it. Unlock! The question is that the proposed words be there added. As many of that opinion say aye.
Aye.
The contrary no. I think the ayes have it, the ayes have it. I declare the question as amended to be agreed to.